Welcome to Nick and Dave Deep Dive the Metaverse, a podcast exploring cult classics, subculture, and geek media. I'm Nick.
And I'm Dave.
And we are going to be your tour guides on this most unorthodox episode of the podcast, where we're going to not dive into Peter Jackson's The Hobbit trilogy, but dive into the Tolkien edit of the Hobbit trilogy.
Yeah, this is basically a fan edit where the editor, who we don't know the name of, because this is sort of a thing floating around the internet that is totally unauthorized by the owners of the property.
Yeah, he's called Tolkien Editor on his blog, but I haven't dug any deeper than that.
Yeah, basically he just went through the three movies, which were just about 10 hours of runtime, and found all the stuff that was actually in the Hobbit book itself, and kept that, removed everything else, and it ended up being 4 hours and 33 minutes of runtime, which is literally less than half of what Peter Jackson included in the trilogy.
Yeah, so were you aware of this before I brought it up? We've talked about The Hobbit a few times.
No, we've talked about doing an episode on The Hobbit, and we were torn on whether we wanted to watch 10 hours of movies, because for us that would mean that it's 10 to 12 hours of podcast.
Yeah, we do a 1-for-1 podcast to video ratio.
And then and then we also talked about just doing the Rankin Bass version. Which is near and dear to my heart, and I will reference it many times this episode, because for me that's the Hobbit. I read that, or I watched that before I read the book as a kid.
Definitely.
This was not on my radar, but I'm really glad that it exists, because when I was watching it, I kept having all these great nostalgic feelings about the book and the animated movie, and I had very few of those moments that I like to call the feels bad moments.
Oh yeah,
when I'm just like, oh man, this is lame, or whatever. Just the moments where I wish they hadn't done that.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, there's a lot fewer of those.
Yeah, there's only a couple, and I'll point them out because that's what I do.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, this was really something cool. The fan edit was made of these movies, but it's worth saying that these movies were very commercially successful. This edit was just for funsies. It wasn't really needed. The total investment to make these movies was about almost $750 million, so $750 million, but it made almost $3 billion.
Yeah.
So that's a lot. They more than tripled their money. They basically quadrupled the money effectively, and that's really good for movies.
Yeah, and this movie has an odd sort of history, or a prehistory to it. After the success of the Lord of the Rings trilogies, the prequel, The Hobbit, got greenlit, and originally it was going to be Guillermo del Toro that was going to direct it.
Yeah, and I'm a fan of his. I like him.
Oh yeah, definitely. And he did quite a bit of pre-production. I don't know if you noticed, but he has a screenwriting credit on this, so a lot of his vision made it into this. But it's important to note he was going to do it as a two-piece, not a 3-movie.
Oh, I think a 2-piece could have. I mean, obviously 4.5 hours of footage would have been 2 movies, and that would have been fine.
Yeah.
I think a 4.5 hour movie is too long.
As a single film, I agree.
I couldn't watch this in one sitting.
Nope.
Even as just a lover of the movie and the property and the story, I still watched it over 2 sittings.
Yeah, I did too. It ended up being just kind of too much to digest all at one time.
Yeah, and I have a few timestamps here in my notes about, I noticed it's been this long and I'm still into it, or I wish it would end right here. A couple spots right like that, and I understand that the Tolkien editor was trying to be faithful to the book and not be artistic, unlike Peter Jackson, who was extrapolating a lot of things and taking a lot of things from other pieces of ephemera, I guess, and adding it in. I don't know. It was good. Overall, I guess that's my quick take, is it was extremely commercially successful, and this edit actually was a value add for me.
Cool. Well, before we dive all the way into that, why don't we talk about what you've been up to lately?
Well, I mentioned in the last podcast that I was preparing to move, and moving happened, and we had a little bit of a hiatus of recording.
We've used up all of our cushion. We're recording this and putting it up in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, this is on the wire. Normally we have we have over a month worth of backlogged episodes ready to publish whenever, but in this case we've used everything, and this is going to be recorded and then published next, which is great that we had that buffer. We're going to build up more anyway. But anyway, I'm in my new house. We're now in the pod cave properly.
Yes, dungeon deep and cavern old. We're here.
Yes, this is the permanent home of this podcast, and I'm glad that we have a dedicated space for it rather than in my old dining room with my cats bothering us. And
there will be no cat dumps being taken during this podcast.
Yeah, they used to like to leave us rude smells to bother with. But anyway, yeah, so that really has taken up all my time. Okay, I say all my time, but most of my time, and we're still not unpacked. We've been here, I don't know, roughly 2 weeks, and we're not fully unpacked.
I think you're more unpacked than I would be. I'd be just using boxes as furniture and living in an unpacked house.
Yeah, well, my wife would not handle that well. She's pretty. I guess the word would be opinionated about the way things should be.
Yeah, that's good though. That's a positive thing.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, she's motivated. So what have you been up to?
Not a whole lot, but I did get out for the first time to go to Record Store Day. Well, it's a little more complicated than that. Normally, Record Store Day is one day.
Yeah.
This year, because of COVID precautions and not wanting to have mass gatherings of people and the such, it was spread out over 3 days. They called them Record Store Day drops, and I went to day 3.
Okay.
And me and my brother-in-law Corey, friend of the show, we went and lined up outside 2nd Avenue Records.
Man!
Early in the morning, and got us some limited release records.
Oh, that's pretty dope.
Yeah, and they're playing it safe. They only allow 10 people in the store at a time, and you had to go a certain way through the store so that people weren't crossing back and forth over each other. And
like the arrows in the grocery store that most people disobey.
Yeah, it's even more difficult in a store full of record crates to navigate that way. But people do their best.
Vinyl is a thing that I have resisted buying through the years, not because I don't like it, but I know myself and I just go nuts with it. So I make the rule that I will only buy vinyl if I'm at a show. I'll buy the vinyl from the band that I'm seeing live, and that's the rule.
I've got just a little over 100 records, which is I think a pretty modest record collection. And I buy it pretty infrequently because I've actually been without a turntable for quite a while. My old Iowa went kaput on me.
Oh, man.
A ways back, and I haven't replaced it. And there's not a lot of incentive to buy records when you don't have a turntable.
Yeah, for sure. Especially since you can get all of the actual music itself digitally streamed for whatever your service is. And I think that buying the album, for me, buying the record at the show is the alternative to buying the shirt.
Yeah.
Because as I know from moving recently, I have easily more than 100 black heavy metal shirts.
Definitely.
So I need no more of those.
It's true. Yeah. And it's worth saying that a lot of small businesses are struggling right now. And 2nd Avenue Records in Portland is near and dear to our hearts.
Yeah.
And I went down there before we did the Metallica podcast in search of a copy of the Black Album. And some scoundrel had bricked their window.
What?
And so I've really felt I wanted to put my dollars towards a store in our community that we value.
Yeah, now I feel like I should go down there at some point.
Yeah, remember good old 2nd Ave. And
yeah, before I could buy cool underground metal band shirts anywhere else, I'd have to get them at 2nd Ave.
That was the place. Ask for that bin of used metal CDs from behind the counter.
Oh yeah, that'd be awesome. All right, well that's enough about that. How about we get into our podcast fuel?
Yes, I'm very excited about this. This is a beer that has it's always caught my interest because of the cool bottle and the name, but I've never actually had it before today. Mm-hmm. And this is the Gulden Drake from Brouwerij van Steenberg. And there, it's a Belgian brewery. It's got a cool golden dragon on there. It's a Belgian strong dark ale.
Yeah, it's really strong. Mm-hmm. I definitely give it that, and it's got a really malty taste to it. It's not quite a porter. It's a red, I guess. They call it a dark red triple ale. Mm-hmm. And it definitely feels triple, and it's definitely pretty dark for a red. It's kind of like this nice, almost crimson color.
Yeah, and they also have a quad. If triple's not enough for you,
this is actually kind of a punch in the mouth. I was recently at Doomsday Brewing and had some of their beers, and I've been going to 5440 regularly, and I've been selecting beers that are a little lighter on the tongue than this. So this was kind of a little bit extra.
It is pretty heavy. It's a 10.5 ABV and 30 IBUs.
I haven't had something a 10% beer in quite a while.
But I like this. I like Belgian styles in general.
Oh yeah.
It comes up every once in a while that my background is Dutch, and a lot of the like the classic breweries of the Netherlands, besides Grolsch and Heineken, got bombed by the Nazis and don't exist anymore. But Belgium didn't quite suffer the same fate, and so their brewing tradition marched on uninterrupted.
That's awesome. Yeah, I really like Belgian beers. My first foray into what I would say is kind of like highbrow beer or whatever before I was getting interested in a lot of local craft brew, I would say is I got interested in, and I guess this was in my early 20s, Trappist beers and, like their Chimay.
Yeah.
And I like anything like a Doppelbock, those kind of styles, or a Maibach. That's actually a high on my list of favorite styles.
Those are big beers too, like ABV-wise.
That's true. I do have a fondness for Belgian beers if we're going there.
Well, cool. I think with that settled, why don't we take our first break, and then we'll get right back into The Hobbit.
All right, great.
Welcome back, divers. I was just about to ask Dave, what we've talked about it a bit before, but what's your history with The Hobbit?
Well, I'm a big Hobbit fan, and as a kid, I mentioned before in this podcast, but also a lot in the last Unicorn episode, that I'm a fan of Rankin and Bass, and I watched The Hobbit a lot when I was a kid.
Oh, I did too.
One thing that I didn't really talk about is even before I had that VHS, I actually had some cassette tapes, early audiobooks that were the audio dramas.
Oh yeah.
Of the Hobbit with the dramatic reading, and it had the dwarves singing and everything.
Oh, I've seen that on Audible, that dramatized version.
Yeah, I had that even as a really young kid. And I listened to that, and I was so young. I was mostly just singing the songs. And I wasn't really following along much with the story. But it really set the groundwork. I mean, that I'm this, like 4-year-old kid who's loving to sing along with the dwarves in Bilbo's house. And so for me, The Hobbit is my quintessential Tolkien work. And I know that is totally not hardcore as far as fandom goes, but it's just the roots go so deep. I expanded from The Hobbit to The Lord of the Rings when I was, like 14, 15.
Yeah.
And then, I've read the Silmarillion, and I've read, a few of the little other side things, but mostly for me, this just has a lot of good feelings surrounding it. I've also read the book several times, including a read aloud to some kids, and I read the entire book, about a chapter a day, and it really lets you know when you're reading it how dated the language is. Basically, 100-year-old English was very much different than it is now. And I kind of like that. It feels a little bit antiquated and a little bit kind of quaint. I like it.
Yeah, well, I think probably even in the time, because this is something, I guess, written around the time of World War I and then released towards the end of World War II, if I'm remembering correctly, the book.
Yeah, something like that.
I think the language was even antiquated then. I think that's an intentional thing.
Yeah, he was trying to sound fancy and like folklorish.
Yeah, and I think I kind of knew that you had read it to kids, and I listened to the audiobook just recently, and I guess I had never actually read the whole book, which surprised me, but I never realized, because people always say it's a children's book, but I never realized how much it is. It is a children's book, and it's the way it's broken up and the way the narration comes across. I feel like it's intended to be read to children like that.
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely very easy to segment this book.
So yeah, like you, I kind of grew up on that cartoon also, and I had a little book on tape of the cartoon.
Oh, nice.
With a storybook with illustrations from the cartoon that I used to listen to in the car while we were driving around or whatever, and I'd flip through the book.
That's awesome.
Used to keep a bunch of those things in the car when I was a kid, those sort of tapes with books.
Yeah, I was sitting next to a little cheap tape player and putting my ear up next to the speaker and stuff. It was a crazy time being old. You know?
But that's probably enough background. Let's dive right into this movie. Right off the bat, you notice the intro framing sequence is gone.
Yeah.
There's a segment with Ian Holm and young Frodo and old Bilbo and the sort of start of the book, and they've just cut all of that. They've gone straight to Gandalf walking up to Bilbo's front door.
And that's how the book starts.
Sort of.
I mean, mostly.
Yeah, mostly, but I think you do miss out on the opening narration.
Because there is a little prologue or something like that.
Where, it says the story starts in a hole in the ground, or I'm forgetting the exact words, but Ian Holm writes them and you're getting his monologue in the full version. And I would kind of like to have that still in there, I think.
Yeah, I think the problem is that this was already really bulky, and you can show that it starts in a hobbit hole by showing a hobbit hole.
Yeah.
This is, I'm always harping on show, don't tell.
Yeah.
And this was the Tolkien editor choosing to show and cut out the tell.
And that, I think... I'm a little more of a fan of narration. This has come up a few times than you are, but yeah, that's to be expected.
I mean, I will warn you, divers and Nick, that I have 4 pages of notes for the chronological, and it's all bullet pointed.
Your typed notes, yeah. I've got that many pages of my scribbled notes.
Yeah, this is typed single-spaced bullet pointed notes.
Okay.
So I assume I won't be using all of this. I'll just sort of use it as a guide for where we're at. But I just noted that I really love that that opening scene with Gandalf. It's just like I remembered from the books, and it's been years since I read the books, so I will have to. I'll give my brain a little bit of credit. And I really was reminded in that opening scene, because I don't know what I was expecting, because I remember seeing the 3 movies in the theater as they came out and thinking, because that was in 2012, 13, and 14, so it's been a few years.
Yeah.
And I remember being done with the last movie and being like, I kind of wish they hadn't done that to my favorite childhood story.
Yeah.
And so I did not look back upon these movies fondly, but when I watched the opening scene with the actors, just Gandalf and Bilbo, and I was like, oh man, These guys are great. This is going to be much better than I give it mental credit for.
Ian McKellen, is geek royalty. We love him. We love him as Gandalf. We love him as Magneto. You could just watch him read the phone book. And Martin Freeman, did you watch The Office, the original Office, the real one?
No, I did not watch that.
Okay, so Martin Freeman is essentially in the gym role from The Office.
Nice.
And so I've been a fan of his going back till then.
Well, and he's Watson from Sherlock.
From Sherlock Holmes, yeah.
And then, which is great because Sherlock is Smaug.
It's a small world, yeah. So Martin Freeman is just the perfect Bilbo. I just love him as Bilbo.
I noted many times that Bilbo is truly good, and he is truly admirable as a person, and that is, I mean, in the text it talks about that, but really the actor was able to frame it such that you had just kind of unending sympathy for him. Yeah, he was just really perfect in this role.
He is a great viewpoint character for the audience because he's not a heroic figure, so he's very relatable, especially I think to going back to how it's a children's book. To a child, it's easy for themselves to put them into Bilbo's bare furry feet and find themselves being taken along with this company.
You know what's funny is when I read this to kids, they were like 9 or 10, and I asked them what they thought Bilbo looked like or what was he like after reading the first chapter or two. And evidently it's not clear if you don't have a paradigm for it what he is. And they actually thought because he lives in a hole and he has furry feet, they thought he was some sort of like talking rabbit. That's what the kids told me.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I was like, okay, I can get that. And so I actually pulled up art on the internet to show them what he looked like. And every time a new character was introduced, I had a picture ready for them.
Interesting. Yeah, it gives a lot of descriptions of the dwarves and of Gandalf, but it really does kind of leave Bilbo a little more vague. Yeah. He's got shaggy hair and furry feet.
Yeah, it could be a little rabbit.
That could be a rabbit. That's interesting. I would never have thought of that.
Yeah, and so we kind of move on, and the dwarves pouring in and having their food there with him, and just eating his entire pantry, and just it was awesome because I love that scene in the movie, I say the movie, like there's only one Hobbit movie. In my heart, there's only one Hobbit movie. But in the cartoon, and I really love that scene. And I loved in the cartoon, they sing a song, crack the dishes, smash the plates, that's what Bilbo Baggins hates, or something that. I'm sure I messed that lyric up.
It's chip the glasses, crack the plates.
Okay, yeah, that's it. Yeah. And so they sing that song, and that's really, and I was wondering, like, I don't think they sing that song. But then at the end of the meal, when they start singing that somber song around the hearth, I'm like,
the Misty Mountains.
Yeah,
song.
I was like, oh man, this is really good. This is a nice part.
And Richard Armitage as Thorin. Got that good baritone voice, man.
Was that really him singing?
Yeah, it's really him singing.
Oh, okay. That's really cool. And one thing that I noticed when Thorin throws wide the door and he's the last dwarf, because he was off meeting with Dane, or not Dane. He was meeting with all the other dwarves.
Yeah, his cousin Dane.
Yeah, and so he opens the door and then he gives that smolder, with those blue eyes, and he looks really young in that shot. And then I was struck by it. I was like, man, he looks like a kid in this shot. And then as you go through, and he gets the dragon sickness and all of that, and
he gets kind of gray streaks in his hair.
He gets pretty grizzled, and then when he this is not a spoiler-free podcast. When he dies, he looks hella old.
Yeah,
he looks like a weathered adventurer.
Well, and the whole the book, I think, even drags it out even longer. The whole adventure takes place over more than a year.
Yeah. It's just like Lord of the Rings in that
It's all about walking.
it's a movie about walking somewhere, or it's a book about walking somewhere. And yeah, this is a classic thing. Like, this is Dungeons and Dragons does this. Like, half of the adventure is getting to the adventure.
All of the Dungeons and Dragons tropes are established in this book. The encounters, it's got elves, it's got giant spiders, kind of all your basic Dungeons and Dragons stuff is from this book.
There's some really fun things in here that just kind of stuck out to me. It's like when they say these quotes that sound like old prophecies or things like, when the birds of yore return to Erebor, the reign of the beast will end. That really stuck out to me. I was like, that's really cool. Talking about the ravens returning to Erebor. That's how you'll know. And then another thing that kind of struck me in the early part of this movie was, this is the classic monomyth. This is the reluctant hero and his call to action. I mean, Bilbo doesn't fit all the monomyth tropes. He doesn't have an auspicious birth or whatever.
Yeah.
But he does fit that reluctant hero that's called to action. And that's really fun. And I just think that opening scene where they get the group together, it was well done. It was executed, and I enjoyed it.
Yeah, and it uses a lot of dialogue that's straight from the book. And I think in this case, some of the changes that are made are improvements and not detriments to it.
Okay.
There's some design choices with a couple of the dwarves that I find a little questionable.
Yeah. I wasn't a fan of how they made Bombur such a clown.
I mean, he's sort of a clown in the book.
A little bit, but not really.
Yeah, I mean, Tolkien's got some culturally insensitive things in his writing. If you start picking them out,
it's very antiquated.
Yeah, there's some anti-Semitic tropes that get applied to the dwarves, and
for sure,
and definite fat phobia, I guess we would say now.
Yeah, he's not very body positive.
No, there's in the Fellowship of the Ring, there's two people called Fatty. He loves making fun of fat people.
Yeah. I mean, I do love meeting the dwarves, and really, when there are really only 4 of the companions, aside from Thorin, that you really get much screen time in this particular edit, and that's Fili and Kili, and they get way less because they had a whole side adventure thing in the 10-hour version, and then of course Dwalin gets a lot of he's kind of the quintessential warrior among the group, and I like him. He's really cool.
His brother Balin gets a lot of screen time because he's the wise old dwarf, and he's the first dwarf to really come around to Bilbo and kind of look after him.
Yeah, I like Balin and Dwalin. I think those two are really cool dudes. And I mean, Fili and Kili are also. But it's like watching this movie and seeing these dwarves just made me want to play D&D and play a dwarf.
Yeah, it's. There's a lot of good dwarf action. Actually, that's another thing I think improves on the book. The dwarves are much more heroic in this, whereas Tolkien is not like in love with dwarves the way he is with elves. And he very specifically says dwarves are not heroes. And I think that's pretty lame, because I like how in this movie when Bilbo is getting run down by some goblins or whatever, and trolls. It's the next scene that's coming.
No, I'm jumping ahead. We'll get back to the trolls. But what I'm just saying on the note of Bilbo and and dwarves being heroes, when Bilbo is about to eat it from some goblins, and Dwalin shows up in the scene, you're like, okay, he's saved. Yeah. Dwalin is a big damn hero. Oh, yeah. He's the mightiest of the dwarves, maybe saved Thorin, and he's awesome.
He's got like iron knuckle dusters on at all times and 2 battle axes on his back, and then probably a warhammer for good measure.
And then at the end, he has that really rad flanged mace that's almost like a triple axe.
Yeah,
It's awesome.
He's a beast.
Yeah, he's unstoppable.
Oh, and he's got all these cool rune tattoos on his head.
I highly support Norse style tattoos.
Yeah, so he's played by Graham McTavish, who pretty much any movie where there's a grizzled Scottish warrior, Graham McTavish is the guy that plays him.
That's good. It's a good spot to be.
He's typecast, but he fits it really well.
Nice. So I guess as they're leaving the Shire and Bilbo's catching up or whatever, having recently played a lot of Red Dead Redemption 2, I like the shaggy ponies.
Oh, yeah. It does. You get an appreciation from horses.
I noticed all the horses through the whole movie. I'm like, oh, that's a fine horse there.
I like Gandalf's horse.
Oh,
he's got like a big, it's like a Shire horse or
like maybe a Morgan or something.
Yeah, big furry hooves and it's a very majestic horse.
Yeah, he doesn't get Shadowfax, for 60 odd years. So
so right away their first night camping is something that gets cut. They
make it a montage. They turned it into a Last Unicorn style across hill and dale montage. It like straight up looked like Last Unicorn.
And I think that's the right choice. But the scene that gets caught about the Goblin War in the Mines of Moria,
where they talk about it,
yeah.
That was a lot of foreshadowing.
It's a good scene. I agree with the cut, but that's a cut that hurts. I kind of marked out cuts, whether I think the cut was good or bad, and how I feel about it. And that one, I get why it's not there, and I appreciate it. But that's a really good scene that's in the full version of the film.
Yeah, I don't know why they cut it. I guess just for time.
Well, they cut things that are not strictly in the book. So that scene where they talk about, or where Balin tells Bilbo about the Goblin War, I believe that is in the book, but it's not a montage. It's just they're
it's just
talking
some
about
conversation over camp. It doesn't take up that much space on the page.
Exactly.
And it's over with, rather than having to devote a whole scene that's going to take 3 to 5 minutes of screen time.
Yeah. So it's one of those cuts that you hate to make, but it was good to make it.
Yeah. And that's cool. One of the things that hit me kind of around this part of the movie is when they're talking about the different places and whatnot as they're traveling, like they're going to the Misty Mountains, and he suggests going to the Hidden Valley, and then they talk about later the Last Homely House. I'm like, man, these naming conventions are really basic, but then I think about it as like, well, he wasn't basing it on anything. Like everything else is compared to this, you know. And I recently read the first book of the Wheel of Time trilogy, and they just straight up lift Tolkien style naming. So Mountains of Mist.
Tolkien does lift a lot of this stuff, and he lifts it from Norse mythology.
Okay.
Basically, the whole company of dwarves and Gandalf are all names that are listed in the Poetic Edda, I believe. Yeah.
Every dwarf is a name from the Eddas, and that's well known because like I do the SCA, which is like historical recreation stuff, and I've met a guy named Thorin. I've met Dwalin. It's just a thing. They're real Norse names. Yeah,
and they're literally, most of them. Gandalf is an elf because it's got Alf in the name. That means elf.
Yeah.
But the company of dwarves are all dwarves that are specifically mentioned in Norse mythology.
And I guess once again I'm gonna give J.R.R. Tolkien a little bit of room because he's kind of the originator of this genre.
Yeah. Oh, he's getting into that stuff when probably no one in the English speaking world is.
Yeah, he was a professor, and he was into really esoteric shit that now we have access to.
Primarily a linguist, he would say.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, I think a lot of these books are just a vehicle for his poetry. Like the stories facilitate getting to put his poems in.
Well, I guess that makes sense. His poems are pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, he's got a silver tongue for sure.
So I guess they're moving forward, and next is the mountain troll scene.
Yes.
And I loved this as a kid in the audio and in the Rankin Bass. This was a great scene, and I think they pulled it off really well in this movie.
They do, and the things that change about it are, in my opinion, improvements.
Okay.
For one, again, the dwarves behave much more heroically.
They bust in to help fight.
Yeah. And Bilbo has a lot more agency in this than he does in the book, where Gandalf sort of masterminds the stalling with the trolls, so that they're caught unawares by the sunrise. But in this, it's Bilbo that has the bright idea, and it's called The Hobbit. And I kind of like having the Hobbit actually get to be the hero of the story.
Yeah, I like that Bilbo, time and time again in this movie, he proves that he's very witty. He's extremely quick. He's faster on his feet, both figuratively and literally, than any of the dwarves.
Yeah, and I like the trolls too.
Oh yeah,
these are the only trolls in any of the Peter Jackson movies that talk. Mm-hmm. And they're they're kind of like Cockney Three Stooges.
Yeah.
And they do a lot of sort of Three Stooges slapstick bits. And that would actually be like contemporary to Tolkien. So I kind of do like that Three Stooges riff.
Yeah, I thought that was really cool how they were chatting, and I really loved. I got a genuine belly laugh when he's fast talking them, and he's talking about how to cook them more properly, whatnot, and he's kind of got them going on a yarn, and then he says, "You have to skin them first."
Yeah,
and then the dwarves are like,
"You traitor!" Yeah, but Thorin picks it up that what Bilbo's doing, while the other dwarves are a little dim. But that's sort of the there's the evolution of the bromance between Thorin and Bilbo. Mm-hmm. That's the first spark that Thorin has for Bilbo, where he's like, "Oh, the Hobbit's actually useful for something."
He actually seems to realize, he's like, "Oh, okay, this burglar is actually witty." Mm-hmm. So I like that.
Yeah, it's a good, it's something they develop slowly over the three movies, and I think that's one of the things I like about it.
Yeah, for sure. And so, of course, we don't need to go blow for blow. They take out the mountain trolls when Gandalf shows up, smashes the rock, and the sun shines through.
And, of course, when the sun comes out, trolls are turned to stone.
Yeah.
Let's remember that, because it's not followed through with later in the film.
No, there are trolls, and they're in the sunlight later on. Although, maybe were they a different kind of thing? Like, were they not trolls? Were they ogres?
They're trolls, and that battle takes place at night in the book.
Okay.
But they do it in the...
Yeah, you're right. It does take place at night. And I remember, because I always thought, like, those eagles are going to have a hard time flying at night.
Yeah. So anyways, a little foreshadowing. Some choices are made later that I don't agree with. Right now, we're still in the realm of stuff I like. Oh, yeah. Like when they go into the troll horde here, and they get their elvish weapons.
Yeah, but in this movie, only a few people pick up weapons, whereas in the Rankin Bass movie, they all get just decked out in elvish gear.
Yeah, but there's really only the three swords. Glamdring, Orcrist, and Sting are the only named weapons.
Yeah, but the rest are all just kind of like really good elven swords.
Yeah, they just... One of the differences, I guess, between the book is the dwarves are much more heavily armed in the movie than
they're armed and armored here, so they maybe just didn't want to drop their dwarven goods and pick up elvish goods. Whereas in the cartoon, they're like dudes in tunics and turn shoes, and they have no armor and no weapons.
Well, that's from the book, because in the time since the fall of Erebor, they've just been getting on as miners and blacksmiths.
Yeah, they're pretty much impoverished.
Yeah, so this is one of their first chances to kind of get new gear in the book, but they're already strapped in the movie.
Yeah, and so basically next they move on. and they decide to go to Rivendell. Well, I should say Gandalf decides to go to Rivendell, and the dwarves aren't happy about that.
Mm-hmm. They don't want to mess with the elves. They don't like elves. Elves don't like dwarves. There's a few cutscenes here involving Radagast the Brown, and the company of orcs that is trailing the dwarves. Mm-hmm. Those are both good cuts, I think.
Yeah, Radagast the Brown is not even needed in this. Yeah, is he's a side character who barely exists. He's barely mentioned.
So I think going straight from the trolls to Rivendell and cutting those two scenes, I think those were good cuts, and I'm with it.
Yeah, totally. And I really, it's funny because as a avid D&D player since childhood, I've always been like a big elves fan. Like I always loved the elves because of Elrond, and I don't know, I just always liked playing elves. But in this movie, I don't much like the elves. I think they're dicks.
Well, do you feel that way about Elrond and the High Elves also, or just the Wood Elves?
Mostly the Wood Elves.
Yeah, because
Elrond is he's fairly prickly, but only because Thorin is such a disrespectful git.
Yeah, well, I think Thorin is broad brushing elves because of the slight from the Wood Elves.
Yeah, and the Wood Elves, even in the book, are dicks.
Yes, and in the animated version.
Yeah, they're super dicks in the animated version.
And it's, I think, there's a lot of in between the lines, but I think you can assume that the Wood Elves are corrupted by the Mirkwood. The Mirkwood Forest has a corrupting influence, and
or
it has
maybe
something.
They corrupted the Mirkwood with their presence.
I don't think so, because dwarves may not like elves, but who does like elves is J.R.R. Tolkien, because he can never shut up about how beautiful and splendid elves are.
Yes, they are. They are the greatest of all. I mean, but one thing that I like about when they arrive in Rivendell, I think it's really cool when
Rivendell is gorgeous.
Yeah, it's just that is my mental picture for elven cities forever. And it's just so cool. And then when the elves return from their hunt or whatever on their horses, and they're circling and they're wearing this really cool plate armor. Yeah. And you never really associate elves with like plate mail. You think of them with like leather or light armor. And anyway, they look really awesome.
It's kind of almost like sort of Greek and Celtic mixed together. Like their helmets are very Spartan. Yeah. Like with the long nasal and everything. But the filigree and all the detailing on it is very Celtic. Yeah,
it almost kind of has there's a Korean style of late period armor that almost looks fairly elven. It's pretty cool, and I like it when he calls him Mithrandir. Yeah, because you haven't heard that before, and it just gives you a sense of, oh, this guy knows things, and Gandalf is not all that he appears to be.
Yeah, Gandalf gets around. Yeah. Gandalf, he truly like seems to regard all the different races, even though they have problems with each other. Everyone is equal to Gandalf. Gandalf is very woke in Middle Earth.
Yeah, he's cool with everybody, but not everyone's cool with him. Yeah, like some people think he's like a trickster, and
not everyone likes wizards.
Yeah, and that's okay. So anyway, they're in the Elven city. They're in whatever Rivendell. God, I just lost it.
It's okay.
And when I was a kid, I really liked the whole scene where the moon shined on the map and revealed things. I thought it was like so special and so fancy. And now in this modern day, I'm so jaded that like, oh, okay, you got a trick map, but like, I think they managed to include in there that it was written in these ancient runes that only someone who was truly old and knowledgeable could read, and I think that they did a pretty good job of that.
Yeah, maybe it's a little too much to expect that we've just happened to pull out the map on the exact right moon.
Exactly. That's a little simple.
I mean, you get it twice a month. You have the right phase of the moon, or is it only one? Yeah, it's only once because it goes across that cycle.
Something like that.
Yeah. So you've got a 1 in 5 chance of being the right phase of the moon.
It did seem a little too serendipitous.
Yeah, but it's a fantasy. It's a fairy tale.
Yeah.
So stuff like that it's cool, and it's again, Tolkien the linguist. It's an excuse to get the runes in there, and he just loves to play with these languages.
And the dwarves do not like staying in Rivendell, and they want to leave like post haste.
Yeah, they don't. And normally the dwarves are very eager to take advantage of free food and drink.
Yeah,
but not in Rivendell. They don't like the vegan food.
Yeah, that food. I mean, I looked at that meal and I was like, bleh.
Well, it does seem like they're serving them an undressed salad. It's it's a little weird.
That did not look good to me.
Yeah, just stick to the good Elvish wine, though. I
mean,
you can have that.
and so they get out of there pretty quick, and they're crossing through the mountain passes.
Okay, so let's take a quick pause there because this is another scene that's cut, and because it is cut, it creates a weird continuity error.
Okay.
So Gandalf, there's a whole scene with Saruman and Elrond and Galadriel all having a little wizard powwow with each other.
Oh, yeah.
And Gandalf uses it basically so that the dwarves can slip on out because Saruman does not want the dwarves to retake Erebor.
Yeah.
And that whole scene is cut, and I think it's a good cut, but it makes it so there's no explanation for why Gandalf isn't with them when they leave.
Huh. Well, throughout this entire thing, Gandalf just sort of comes and goes. He's kind of a bad party member. He doesn't really talk to people. He comes and goes, and he shows up at the last minute. They get captured a lot of times.
Yeah.
Which wouldn't have happened if he was there.
But yeah, Gandalf is doing... Basically, there's a whole side quest that Gandalf is doing involving a necromancer.
Yeah. And it's all cut.
And it's not really in the book. Gandalf explains it at the end of the book. Oh, I was off fighting the necromancer. But it's not on the page in the book, and so it's not in the cut.
And I think that's fine. And
yeah, but we lost Christopher Lee and Cate Blanchett and just some good scenes with some great actors.
That's true. But it's already 4.5 hours.
Yeah,
you gotta do something.
I call this a scene. It's a good cut, but it's a cut that hurts.
Okay.
You hate to lose these scenes, but they gotta go.
But you love to get your time back.
Yeah, totally.
So they're trekking through the mountains, and this was a thing that I really liked in the back in the day, is the stone giants fighting. And I actually felt like this was done really well. It was fun. Like, I enjoyed watching these stone giants go at it.
I wrote that down too, and it's one of the times there's a problem. I'm cracking open my second Belgian beer here. There's a problem in these movies for me, in the theatrical versions of them, where I call them sort of Rube Goldberg scenes, where the party is moving from platform to platform and having a very video gamey experience.
Oh yeah, I actually mentioned that too in my notes.
So that happens for the first time here, but I like this one.
Yeah, I said the falling shtick starts here. Mm-hmm. And then we continue to have this falling thing where they're just like being taken. Oh, the platform we're on is falling over to this other platform thing. Or it happens with the goblins. It happens in Erebor.
It's a very Peter Jackson-y thing. He starts doing that, I think, in King Kong is the first movie where he really gets into this. And you've been to Universal Studios, right? Where the King Kong experience thing where where your tram falls around. It's a very theme parky experience that he started doing with King Kong, and then he goes nuts with it in these movies.
And I wrote in my notes here that this is where the shtick starts, and I hope they cut out most of it. Because even when I was watching it the first time in the theater, I I did not like it. I was very much against it. I was like, that's not what it's supposed to be like. I don't want this to be a theme park ride. This is not a roller coaster.
Yeah.
And so I really did not like that.
We like this one though, right? We like the stone giants.
I like the stone giants fighting a lot, and I'm okay with a little bit of craziness of them falling this way and that. But I feel like even then it was a little gratuitous. It was a little extra.
Yeah. Okay. We're on the same page there.
And so they get through that, and they couldn't cut that scene because it was so cool from the book. But it doesn't actually contribute to anything plot-wise. It's just scenery.
Yeah. But it is, in this case, it is part of the book.
Yes, it's important because it's in the book. If you were just doing a theatrical cut, you could have cut that. If you were trying to make this book into a movie, because it's not plot related.
You definitely could. And I think there's a certain thing when you make rules for yourself and then later you break them, how strictly you held yourself to the rules make the breaks more glaring. So
yeah, for sure.
So they leave this scene in even though it's maybe non-essential. Later they cut an essential scene and so that it flows better, and it's really kind of sticks in my craw.
Okay. Anytime I hear the saying sticks in my craw, I think of the kids in the hall. What's in your craw?
Yeah. Oh, I forgot about that.
That's a funny one. All right. So basically the fights between the giants and all that nonsense, it causes them to go into a little cave area. And that's basically where shit goes down, right?
Yeah. Well, so they take refuge in this cave.
They decide to sleep. They're not going to build a fire. They're just going to sleep on the ground. And turns out...
Well, Bilbo thinks he's feeling bad because Thorin had to save his ass from the stone giants. And Bilbo's starting to feel like a liability.
He kind of is.
And he's going to sneak out and leave.
He's like, I'm going to go home.
Yeah. But then good old his trusty elvish blade starts glowing blue.
Man, I love that. In this movie, I liked how they used Sting to great effect. And there's a scene coming up where it happens too. But yeah, so the goblins attack, and Bilbo kind of slips away, and that's when Gollum enters the story.
Yeah, the goblins open up a big crack in the ground and grab the dwarves unawares while they're sleeping.
Yeah.
Bilbo is able to kind of give the goblins the slip because he's so sneaky, but then he ends up falling down a hole with another goblin and finds himself in Gollum's lair.
And Gollum goes over and he finds the goblin, and you see Bilbo hiding behind a rock, and Sting is glowing, and then you see Gollum starts taking the rock to the head of the goblin, and then Sting glows no more.
Yeah, I thought that was really effective, and I mean, I could do an hour on Andy Serkis, probably.
Yeah. It was just so good.
I love Gollum. So going back to the animated version when we were kids, I was so terrified of Gollum. It's like he's my favorite character, but also like the thing that scared me the most. And I actually when I was a little kid, like you were saying, like 4 years old, I couldn't look directly at the TV when Gollum was on it. I'd watch that whole Riddles in the Dark segment through a mirror, looking back on the TV, and I wouldn't look directly at the TV until Gollum was gone. He scared me so much.
That's crazy. So there's a character that scared me quite a lot, and I'll get to that. But I loved Gollum. He scared me. He really did, with his crazy eyes. Like, it was the eyes.
And the way they make his eyes glow in the cave is so good.
Yeah, the crazy eyes really got to me as a kid. But I would walk around hunched, and I would call things the precious, and I told all of the riddles just over and over again. Like my older brothers must have hated that shit.
There's some good riddles in there.
Yeah, they are.
Bilbo's got some good ones, and Gollum has good ones.
Yeah, and you know what? At the end of the riddle competition, I was on Gollum's side. I was like, you can't ask what's in your pocket. That's not a riddle.
Yeah.
And even his guesses were good. Like, nothing.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Knife. Hands.
hands, knife. He said a string.
Yeah. String or nothing.
Yeah, the hands, that was a good guess.
Oh, yeah, because Bilbo's like real quick puts his hands up.
Because if the hand had been in the pocket, then he would have.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a hilarious thing. Like, that is the best deal for Gollum ever. It's like, if I win, I eat you. If I lose, I have to show you out. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was really cool.
And yeah, so I love Gollum. I love that whole scene. I love the way Andy Serkis is able to differentiate Smeagol, the Hobbit.
Oh yeah.
From Gollum the Wretch.
I love it when he's acting as Smeagol and he's just totally sincere, and his his eyes are bright, and you have pity for him. And then when Gollum interrupts him and he's like choking, I'm like, oh man, this is dark.
Yeah, and I think it's actually better developed than it is in the book, because the ring and the ring's effects have been better developed than they were when Tolkien wrote The Hobbit originally. And
that's
so
a controversial statement.
No, going back to the Hobbit, going back, the ring develops more across the Lord of the Rings trilogy.
Sure, that's true.
And
it's a little more character.
And Gollum the character develops more. So going back to the beginning now, with the knowledge of where the character is going in the future, you're able to play him as less of just a monster as he is in the book, and make him a rounded character.
Yeah, and I like that. I think it's really great acting and it's good storytelling there. But then it kind of cuts over to the dwarves and the goblins, and I like that they kept down in Goblin Town. No, they didn't keep down in Goblin Town. That's from Rankin Bass. Instead, they have the Goblin King singing some other weird song that was not.
Is that one not from the book?
I don't know, but it certainly wasn't from Rankin Bass.
Yeah.
And that, for me, in my brain, is where my mind. That's just where I go.
Yeah.
And the thing
I think
is,
some of the lyrics do come from the book.
I kind of hated this Goblin King.
I do too.
He's just terrible. This is bad pod when we totally agree on everything. But I do not like the look of this guy. I don't like his voice. He's not intimidating. And part of the reason why I feel that way is because when I was a kid, for me, the most frightening character in the movie was the Goblin King, with his huge mouth and his almost toad-like body.
Yeah, the goblins in the animated version, they look like Pac-Man frogs.
Kind of, yeah. And they're scary. Like, they could eat a hobbit in one bite.
And they have this huge mouth, like a Pac-Man frog does, and then it has 2 throat holes inside of it, which, I mean, anatomically doesn't make any sense, but is scary.
Yeah.
Like, it's effectively scary.
So for me, when the Goblin King is screaming at Thorin in the cartoon, that was a moment of ferocity. I loved it. And then when you just make him this kind of jokey, cartoony, not fierce thing, I did not like that.
I 100% agree. The Great Goblin is much better in the animated version. No offense to Barry Humphries that plays him in this version. We just like the cartoon better.
Yeah, so I kind of feel like these two scenes that kind of go concurrently, it flashes back between the goblins and the dwarves and the Hobbit.
I do like the goblins, though.
The goblins are pretty good in general, but I feel like the big winner in this was that Gollum was amazing.
Yeah.
The big loser was the Goblin King was lame.
100%. I agree. And this gets us into one of the worst of the Rube Goldberg, the platform is falling scenes.
Oh, yeah.
Gandalf shows up. He does like a lightning blast, zaps a few goblins, and then takes the dwarves and they start running out, and they go through a whole Mario world of platforms.
Yeah.
And it's really tedious.
Yeah, so when it started at the beginning of the fighting retreat, I actually thought, okay, this is rad.
Yeah.
Like, the fighting is good. I like watching Feely and Keely
Just
slay
wreck goblins.
Yeah, they're just going off. And it's like, and when the Goblin King confronts Gandalf, he goes like, "What are you going to do now, wizard?" And then clearly the answer is, rather than cast spells, I'm just going to kill you with my weapons.
So I wrote that in my notes. Gandalf is a very frugal wizard.
Oh yeah,
He loves to sling Glamdring around way more than he likes casting spells.
Yeah, he is a first edition wizard in that he only has like 4 spells total. So
he went lightning bolt, and I'm gonna hold my other 3 spells.
Yeah, he's like, all right, now I'm a fighter, and I dual wield 2-handed weapons,
Yeah.
staff and greatsword.
Okay, yeah, that explains it.
Yeah, I liked that he killed the Goblin King. I thought that was cool. But you're right. The platforming, they really should have cut about 3/4 of it.
Yeah, so this is one of this. I was kind of struggling for where to bring this up. So when these movies were released theatrically, they were filmed in 48 frames per second.
Okay.
Which is double the standard 24 frames. And it creates this sort of sense of hyper-realism that when you get into these big CG, ridiculous special effects scenes, they look, because they're so realistic and so unreal at the same time, it really, like, the uncanny valley is bad.
Okay.
So this, watching it in MP4 or whatever format we were watching these in,
Fairly low res.
it actually improved the experience for me, because seeing these in the theater, I found this stuff just unbearable, and watching it on the computer, it was only irritating.
Yeah, that didn't really bother me. The visuals didn't really get to me. To me, it was the storytelling part through this. And here's one of my timestamps, the first one. 90 minutes in, and I'm really liking this. I'm having a lot of fun, and it's generally following what I recall from the book. So 90 minutes in, at this point, we barely just got past the goblins. And just so you know, we're less than 90 minutes into our podcast, so that means we're beating it our 1-for-1 record. So.
Oh, we're getting snappier.
So yeah, this is good, and I enjoyed it. And 90 minutes in, they have barely scratched the surface of the story. They haven't even made it to Mirkwood yet.
Yeah. So from here, Bilbo, he has the first of many times when the ring accidentally slips onto someone's finger. Smeagol figures out that Bilbo has the ring in his pocket. That's the answer to the riddle.
Of course, because he's a filthy, thieving, lying hobbit.
Yeah, and Smeagol is pursuing Bilbo. Bilbo falls down, and the ring, it wants a home. The ring slides onto his finger. The ring is much more sentient than we're aware of.
Sure.
And the ring was tired of Gollum and wanted a new healthy host.
It wanted to get out of those caves.
Yeah, and so it found its way onto Bilbo's finger, and Bilbo discovers that he's invisible. And I think the effects are really cool when you have the ring on, how everything's a little sort of underwater-ish.
Yeah. Kind of ghostly.
Yeah, and Bilbo sees the dwarves escaping, and he gives Gollum the slip, and he has a moment where he's gonna
kill him.
He's gonna kill him, and then he sees the Smeagol eyes, and he can't do it.
And what really rang in my mind right at that moment, when you see the Smeagol eyes, and he's holding up Sting, it was Gandalf's words from the beginning of the movie when Gandalf said, "True courage is the ability to spare a life."
Yeah, and for better or worse, Bilbo.
He's definitely worse. Actually, he kind of helps Frodo.
Oh yeah, Smeagol is really important to Return of the King.
Kind of
sure.
feel like I need to watch those movies.
Oh yeah, I want to watch them so bad now. Like it's weird how watching a movie makes you want to watch other movies or read other books, and You just get into the stuff. But he does kick Smeagol in the face on the way out, which
and that's okay.
Yeah, that's okay. He earned it. He was going to eat him.
Yeah, Smeagol's a dick. I mean, Gollum's a dick. Smeagol's a sweetheart.
Yeah,
but Gollum deserved a face kicking.
Yeah, so he kicks him in the face and catches up with his friends, the dwarves, and he hears them talking shit about him.
Yeah, and that's really brutal. And I loved it. And I loved it that he basically he hears them talking shit about him, and then he approaches them anyway.
Yeah.
And they ask him, why is he there? And he says that precisely because he loves his home and he loves the Shire, and they have lost their home and everything they had, that he wanted to make sure that they had a home to go back to. And this is a moment that really touched me in that this is because Bilbo is truly good.
Yeah. He had a moment earlier where he says something to Nori, I think, about how dwarves are used to not having a home and they don't belong anywhere. And then he really he kind of checks his privilege and becomes aware that it's not that dwarves don't have a home. It was literally stolen from them.
Yeah, those dwarves probably would have liked to have a home.
Yeah. They probably didn't want to have to work in mines and sweatshops.
Yeah, it's very much, it's a Karen move that he does right there.
Yeah. Bilbo's like, I'd like to speak with your manager.
You probably like living like this.
Yeah. I thought, no, it's one of those moments where Bilbo just kind of shows his true character, and it's another moment where Thorin has to this hobbit has got some grit to him.
Yeah, this is a good dude. And so then it kind of cuts to the White Orc, kind of talking about him. Help me out here with the continuity. I really don't remember the White Orc being a thing in the Rankin Bass or really much in the book at all.
Okay, so no, he is not in the animated version at all.
Okay.
There's no orcs, quotes.
They're mostly just goblins.
They're
but
only
back
goblins.
then, that was basically a synonym.
Tolkien he's a little fiddly on the whole orc-goblin relationship. He doesn't...
Because Shagrat is a goblin, but he hangs with those black orcs.
Right, and the name of Thorin's sword... Orcrist, the goblin cleaver. So orc and goblin are sort of synonymous there. But Tolkien says in the book, the large ones are called orcs. So he does sort of make a distinction between goblins and orcs. The more gremlin-y ones are the goblins, and the more jacked ones are the orcs.
And so an Uruk-hai
is the next step up.
Yeah, they're the evolved ones that come out of the pens.
And that's Saruman's creation.
Yeah. Okay.
And there are some of those in this movie too, and they're definitely not in the book.
Looks-wise, there's definitely some Uruk-hai, but there shouldn't have been.
There should not have
They
been.
should have just been goblins and jacked goblins.
Correct. And so Azog, the pale orc,
who is just a jack goblin.
And he gets mentioned by name in the book, I believe, one time.
I think there's a metal band named Azoth, but I could be wrong.
Probably, yeah.
That's a cool name.
And he's not even... They kind of flip it a bit because there's another orc called Borg who is mentioned by name multiple times in the book. And Azog is sort of Borg's henchman. And in the movie, they've reversed it.
Okay.
And made Borg into the henchman and Azog into the villain. And I don't know why, but I do like Azog. I think he's a cool looking orc. And being white makes him, albino, makes him sort of distinct from all the other orcs.
Sure, it makes him visually interesting differently.
Yeah. And so Azog and the Warg Riders come, and it's weird how the things we cover play into each other, because Varg is that this is where Griefy Grishnok, where he got his other name, is also from here.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So Varg in Old Norse is like a killer wolf. I know this from the Lords of Chaos book. It's it's something you would call a wolfish person that was a criminal.
Okay.
Like, so being branded as a Varg is like saying this person's a criminal killer. So
I guess that checks out.
Tolkien uses warg or Varg fairly interchangeably with wolf, but basically, again, sort of a wolf is to a Varg what a goblin is to an orc. The wargs are the jacked wolves.
Yeah, and they're the ones that they're riding.
Yeah, you can ride on a warg. You couldn't ride on a regular wolf.
Yeah.
Anyways, this leads into the cut that I think is unpardonable.
Oh.
Because we go from the wargs chasing the party, and it very awkwardly cuts to
Beorn, yeah.
And we skip over the whole thing with the eagles. And this is essential to the story. The eagles are very important.
I agree, because in this cut, the eagles only show up at the end.
Right. And there's a moment when the wargs and the orcs have the dwarves all pinned up in the tree, and they're throwing firebombs down.
Oh, yeah,
and
I like that.
And Thorin marches out and squares up with Azog and fights with him, and the warg wrecks him, and Bilbo saves his ass. And it's a really important moment for the development of their relationship, and it's just gone.
And is that in the long form version of these movies?
Yes. Okay. That's in the long form. It's not in this because of the way they cut the two scenes together.
Huh.
And the reason why they did, or why the Tolkien editor chose to do it this way, is so that he could make it one continuous film and not have the break, because that's where one film ends and the next one begins. And so in order to make it flow, he cuts out the eagle scene, but this is a bad cut. This one needed to stay in.
Yeah, the eagles are pretty critical because they are the fifth army that arrives at the end for the Battle of Five Armies.
Yeah. And how dedicated Bilbo is to Thorin doesn't make sense without this moment. Mm-hmm. And so I think this was a bad cut.
All right. Well, yeah, I just remembered that having the White Orc wasn't a huge deal, and he was a much bigger thing in this than I remembered, and that's cool. And then the eagles were gone, and that's lame, and then boom, you're in Mirkwood.
Well, yeah, we have a thing with Beor.
Oh yeah, I forgot about the whole Beorn part. Because Beorn is actually not really in the cartoon much.
He's not in the cartoon at all.
Yeah, you're right. He's not in there at all, but he is in the book.
He is in the book, and it's one of those long things.
It's very cuttable.
I'd rather keep the eagles and lose Beor than the other way around.
Yeah, I agree. It's kind of like Tom Bombadil not really being in the movies. It's okay.
Yeah, I don't want to. Let's not get too wrapped up in this. But so I started listening to the audiobook of The Fellowship of the Rings after I finished The Hobbit.
Oh snap!
As you do. And man, I hate this Tom Bombadil stuff. It's like
Tom Bombadil needs to go.
It's like 3 or 4 chapters of nothing but Tom Bombadil singing about stuff, and it's like 4 hours of audiobook before they get to the prancing pony, and then the story just starts. Like, that's even before Legolas and Gimli. That's just where they meet Aragorn.
Yeah, I almost feel like that story needs to go from the Shire to the prancing pony
directly
to the Fellowship of the Rings, and you move on, and that's where that book needs to go.
And so I don't want to tangent on that too much, but it gets into something.
That's what we do.
That's what we do. Peter Jackson's instincts in the Lord of the Rings trilogy about what to cut and what to save are strong. They're really good. I think he makes the hard cuts in order to do one book a movie there. Can
we fully agree that the Lord of the Rings trilogy is better than the Hobbit trilogy?
Oh yeah, that's not even...
But can we agree that the Hobbit book is better than the Lord of the Rings trilogy?
So far. I've only started in on the book.
Okay, I've read them, but that's my feeling. The movies are better for Lord of the Rings. Hobbit book is best.
I am inclined to probably believe you because I'm so tired of Hobbit songs. And I'm tired of how long it takes just traipsing through the woods and getting stuck in bogs. And
it's a walk. That's
man.
the whole book.
Yeah. But, okay. So anyways, Bjorn gives them shelter.
Yeah. And he's this cool big werebear guy. And that's pretty neat, but it's totally unnecessary.
But he lends them ponies to ride
cool.
to the gate of the Mirkwood. And this is where Gandalf says, I got to go wizard shit. And
it's like, hold on, I'm the worst. Later.
But that's exactly how it is in the book.
It is.
He leaves now to go on his side quest and fight the necromancer.
Am I like a heretic for saying that Tolkien is a weird storyteller for doing that with one of his main characters?
Gandalf is an NPC. He's not one of the party members.
That's true. He is. He's like if you're running a game and there's this wizard mentor guy, you literally can't have him bailing the party out of every hard encounter.
Yeah, so they've got to get lost in the woods on their own.
Yeah, for sure.
And I love the way they handled the Mirkwood in the movie.
It was cool.
It's actually maybe an improvement on the book.
Okay, it's an improvement on the cartoon, I'll say. And I like that part in the cartoon, but I like how gnarly it is. Like, the Mirkwood is truly scary.
Yeah. And
imagine an Ent from there. It'd be pretty
just
nasty.
A super stony Ent.
Just nasty. So I really liked the Mirkwood. It was totally sinister. And I really, really liked the whole the whole upcoming spider scene. But just before the spider scene, basically how Bilbo gets separated from the guys is he climbs the tree canopy and he sticks his head up out into the sunshine and the fresh air. And I just remember that from the cartoon. And in retrospect, it's very, very Last Unicorn, how it's just whimsical and beautiful and it's awesome. And then he goes back down and
everyone's gone.
And there's spiders.
And that is more or less straight from the book.
Yeah.
They have Bilbo climb up to look and he sees the butterflies and it's beautiful. And he gets a clear head when he comes out of the enchanted forest.
Yeah.
And then, but he's seeing the rustling of the giant spiders there.
And those spiders were really creepy.
And I think they do a really cool effect here that I really like, that he, in the book, animals and stuff just talk. Yeah. And you can either understand animal speech or not, but Bilbo understands the animal speech.
It's because he's a small rabbit.
When he puts the ring on.
Okay.
He can understand the spiders while he's wearing the ring.
Oh.
And I think that was a really cool effect because normally you can't talk to spiders, but because the ring is evil and the spiders are evil, it's just, that's
good
story.
Are they evil or are they just doing spider things?
Oh, they're pretty sinister. But yeah, that's Morticia Addams, right? What's normal to the spider is chaos to the fly.
Exactly. They're just doing spider things. It's not a big
That's
deal.
true. We shouldn't good and evil are not useful terms.
I mean, they kind of are in a fantasy, but yeah.
Spiders are evil. They have evil alignment.
So yeah, I really liked the spider scene. I liked the whole how creepy they were and how gnarly they were. I liked in the story, in all of the mediums, that Bilbo's the big damn hero here.
Oh yeah,
he cuts them out and he's saving them and he's killing spiders. And I like how he names his sword Sting.
Yeah, because it stings when you stab a spider with it.
Yeah, and the spiders are not cool with this thing they can't see.
And of course, a spider would call it a sting, right? Because the spiders they're venomous creatures, and they're not human level intelligence.
No, they're not smart.
Yeah. And Bilbo, he loses track of the ring here, and I think this is not something that's from the book, but I think this is a really good moment to show Bilbo has
obsession.
Yeah, he has a little Gollum moment when there's sort of like a centipede, like a giant centipede or something comes up and it's over the ring and Bilbo goes over and just chops it to bits.
Yeah, I like how he just went aggro on it. He's just like, goes nuts. And then the next thing I've got down is Enter Legolas. He's such a dick.
Of course, I love Legolas.
Of course.
I hate that he's in this movie.
Well, he should be, though, because he's the son of the Elven King.
It makes logical sense that he would be there, right? Because it's his kingdom.
And he's a ranger.
Yeah.
You know?
I don't hate that he shows up exactly, but there's a moment specifically he's doing a bad cop on what's his name? Gloin? Gimli's father.
Oh, yeah.
And he looks at the picture.
Who's this ugly little monster?
Yeah. And it's like, of course, they have a relationship later that develops and they become good friends.
Yeah.
But that's a groaner for me, man. I'm really like, ugh. I don't like that.
But would you die with a friend?
Yeah. I could do that.
Exactly. So, yeah I mean, because the bromance between Legolas and Gimli is one of my very favorite parts of the Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, Gloin, that's his name. Peter.
Yeah, it's Gimli, son of Gloin. Everybody knows that.
Gimli, or Peter Hambleton plays him.
I did not know Peter Hamilton was Gloin. But yeah, that moment was funny in sort of like a her stupid way. They should have cut that. Yeah. I don't know.
But there's no way to pull it out of this scene without and have it make sense.
Making it be really weird. Yeah.
So this, and we don't have to like really bedrag this point, but there's a whole romance triangle, love triangle between Legolas, Keely, and an elven lady that is completely extracted from this edit of the movie.
And rightfully so.
Yes.
That was dumb.
That's no disrespect to the cast who I watched those scenes this morning, and the scenes are good. They act their hearts out. They're all good performers. It's a great performance from every one of them, but it has nothing to do with The Hobbit.
Yeah, it's not in the book, and it made the castle scene, the elven castle scene, way too long. In the book, it talked about how they were incarcerated for a while, and basically Bilbo learned the whole castle, and he learned everyone's routines, and he was just lurking around invisibly in the castle for a long time. And so I guess Peter Jackson felt the need to fill time.
I think so. I was talking about this with my wife Lisa, and we've both watched the appendices to the Lord of the Rings movies quite a bit. Before the days of streaming, those DVDs were our comfort watch DVDs, and so they were just on all the time. And so her perception of inside the head of Peter Jackson was his chance to expand his time in Middle Earth and stay there with these characters more.
Okay.
And that he just wanted to spend more time with them. And so to get more time with Legolas, he couldn't pass it up. and he just wanted to be there and to drag it out. But unfortunately, that ends up being bad for the film.
Yeah, that part was lame. And I remember that when they were theatrically released thinking, okay, this is extra. This is nonsense. So I'm super glad that they cut all of that castle drama and just got rid of it.
We love Evangeline Lilly. You're a great actor.
Because she's listening.
Yeah, but we don't need this scene. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and I mean, I like all of it, and it was good acting. But let's just not have The Hobbit have a love triangle. We just don't need it. It's not in it.
It's called The Hobbit. It's not called the dwarves and the elves. Anything that's not about Bilbo is okay to go.
Yeah, and I think that the next scene is really cool, the barrel rider scene. I think that was fun. I think that it maybe got a little video game-ish in the action sequences, but generally speaking, I liked the barrel riding part in the cartoon. I thought that the dwarves being in the barrels and Bilbo riding on it, I thought that was fun.
I much prefer the way it's handled in the book and the cartoon, where they're sealed up in the barrels.
Yeah, me too.
And it's just, I mean, that's harrowing enough. Riding inside a barrel down a rushing river is already intense. You don't need to be pursued by orcs and elves, both shooting arrows and have like...
Yeah, that was extra.
There's some asinine stuff. Although I do like the dwarves picking up the orcish weapons and fighting. There's stuff I like in it, but all in all, it should be much simpler, much tidier, and Tolkien editor did his level best to clean this scene up and make it as tight as possible. It's just hard because there was a lot of shit in there.
Yeah, I basically noted that the combat was cheesy, but that's what you're going to get. This movie is intentionally cheeky sometimes, and that's
it's kind of silly.
Yeah, they try to add that in from time to time. And
like Bomber sticking his arms out of the barrel and spinning around. That
was notoriously bad. Bomber, the whirling barrel dervish, nah, you can get rid of that.
It's his only hero moment, though, in the 3 movies.
That's true. Well, Bomber's kind of a jag in the movies. He's no good. But I like it when they arrive. I like it when they meet Bard of Lake Town. Bard was probably my favorite side character as a kid, just because I've always loved the whole idea of an archer. This man of Lake Town who is able to slay the dragon. Spoiler.
Yeah.
I just love that character. As a kid, he was my hero.
Bard. So Luke Evans plays Bard. Great casting. He's sort of perfect in that role. And Bard is really like royalty in exile, right? His father was the king of Dale.
Yeah.
Or the Lord of Dale. I guess Dale wasn't a kingdom.
Sure.
But no, he's a king. He is a king of Dale because it's all like city states and
every if you have a little bit of territory, you're a king.
Yeah. So his father was king, so he's really like a deposed prince, just working as a bargeman, and making the best of it. He's a widower, and he's got 3 barons
kids,
at home, and the dwarves show up in their barrels. He's the guy that collects the barrels when the elves send them down the river, and so he ends up getting contracted to smuggle the elves into Lake Town, or the dwarves into Lake Town.
Imagine smuggling elves in.
Yeah, the elves seem to be running stuff.
Oh yeah, they have the cash. Yeah, so I like it. He smuggles them in, and then they have that moment where they float by and it shows the dwarven windlands. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's cool. Definitely not in the book and not in the cartoon, but it's cool, I guess. I almost would have rather it have been a bow, just like a badass archery shot. But, it is what it is.
So I wrote this down. I wrote this question down. How do we feel about the dwarven windlands? Because I wanted to know your opinion on it, because I'm of the same one. Him using a bow and arrow is much more epic than using...
and he does.
Yeah, ultimately he does. But it's foreshadowed he's going to use this dwarven weapon.
Yeah. And I think that's a cool weapon. It's like a quad crossbow with steel beams.
Yeah, it's J.R.R. Martin, he gets a lot of his steez from G.R.R. Martin gets it from J.R.R. Tolkien.
Well, yeah, he has the R.R. in his name, in his things as a tribute. That's
so
a known thing.
You shoot dragons with a scorpion. that's how that goes.
That's a thing. And so I would say that the entire Lake Town scene situation was just a bit much. I feel like they even with the edits, it was a bit too much. It was
Definitely.
slow. It wasn't actually interesting to me in the least. I pretty much wanted them to be done with Lake Town like well before they were done, and then all of a sudden the master embraces them. And he's like, "Yes, we will help you." And I'm like, "Oh, this was a climax of nothing."
Yeah, so that's actually the master, played by Stephen Fry. That is from the book. His little servant Alfred, who's sort of like
It's Grima.
or yeah, Wormtongue. Yeah,
Yeah.
It's like a predecessor to him. That's an invention of the movie, and it's not one we needed.
No, there's way too many Alfred scenes in this damn movie.
Yeah, and they're hard to cut out because he's all around Bard.
He's around Bard all the time.
Yeah, and so they cut again. This is where hats off to Tolkien editor. He did his level best to extract Alfred from the movie, and it just couldn't be done.
Yeah, Alfred was lame. Okay,
Sorry, Ryan Gage.
yeah. The thing is he was acted well, and it was a very on the nose younger Grima Wormtongue, but the unibrow was a bit much.
It's all gross. Like, so he's got a
And he's got
unibrow
kind of
and
a hunchback.
and a hunchback. Yeah, I don't enough with using like physical disabilities as a signifier of villainous intent.
Unibrow is not a disability.
Kind of is.
That's a social disability. But yeah, I agree. There was no reason to make him a hunchback. And honestly, I just think that being a sniveling bureaucrat is disability enough. Everyone hates you automatically.
Yeah.
You don't need to be also physically different.
Yeah.
And I think that was just blah. The whole Lake Town scenes were just blah to me anyway. I didn't like any of it much because I like how they handle it in the cartoon. It's just like bing boom bum. You're on the way. You're going. The dwarves are now in a boat and they're heading to Erebor. Mm-hmm. Let's just skip to that.
Yeah, and that's how the book handles it. I think that's better. And then we split off Keely and Feely and one more dwarf. Who's that? And Nori?
Dingus.
Yeah, and Nori. They all stay behind.
Yeah.
And as a result of it, because the storyline that they're engrossed in is mostly cut, we don't see a lot more.
Yeah, it's basically pointless because they cut the whole Legolas comes and fights at Lake Town, and all of that is just out.
And so we lose like our three youngest dwarves, basically, who are actually some of the best warriors.
Well, and Feely and Keely are two of the best warriors, and they're next in line of succession. They're Thorin's nephews.
Right.
They're his brother's sons. And
It's because Keely picked up a wound that gets infected.
Yeah.
So he got clipped by an orcish arrow in the barrel riding sequence, and he's doing poorly. And so he ends up staying at Bard's house in Lake Town. And having a whole subplot that we rightfully excised from this movie.
Yeah, and so it basically meant that those guys were essentially written out of the story until near the end. And it felt a little awkward.
It's a bummer, but it just had to happen.
It's fine. So basically, then the dwarves go and they're trekking, and they're looking for the back door, and they find the stairways to go up the mountainside, and they go there and they can't seem to find the keyhole, and they're on the last day, on Durin's Day.
It's the start of the Dwarvish New Year,
and they just can't find it. And ultimately they don't think that it could be moonlight, not sunlight.
And so that's a change from the book, right? Because it is they drag it out quite a bit more than the book does.
Oh yeah, they really drag it out and try to savor the moment, and it's too much.
You think so?
Yeah.
I tend to agree with you, but
Peter Jackson really just tries to wring every bit of drama from every little moment.
It's true. It's for good and ill, right? It's like it's what's great about him, and it's also like his Achilles heel.
Sure.
But Bilbo, true, stout-hearted little hobbit, he doesn't give up hope, and he stays there until the moonlight shines on the keyhole and the thrush knocks 3 times or whatever the thing is.
Did you notice that maybe it was because they filmed it in 48 frames per second or whatever, and that thrush was obviously obviously CGI. It looked like animatronic in its movement, and it didn't look like a bird. It didn't move right. It looked like a little robot that landed on a thing and was like herky-jerky pecking on a thing, and I was just like, this is not a good look.
It doesn't look real at all. Yeah. No, I didn't really bump up on that, but I don't disagree with that.
It was just really off-putting because I really liked the thrush scene in the cartoon.
And it's much longer in the book because the thrush speaks to them, and the dwarves speak bird, but Bilbo doesn't. And it's like it's a whole thing that Tolkien really drags out.
Yeah, sometimes, I mean, not to besmirch the master, but sometimes Tolkien belabors points that no one but him are interested in.
Primarily a linguist, he's very concerned with who speaks which language.
That is very true. So basically, the fake robot thrush knocks 3 times and whatever. And
the moonlight shines on the keyhole. Bilbo just about kicks the ring off the cliff
like a ding dong, and that's not even in the book. That's just Peter Jackson being lame.
Yeah, but it gives a cool moment for Thorin to smolder,
to step on it and look at Bilbo like, "Look at me, I saved the day." Whatever, Thorin, you're annoying.
But they open the door. And they send their little burglar in to retrieve the Arkenstone.
I mean, this is just like in the cartoon where they're literally standing outside the door. The freaking dwarves, cowards they are. They won't even go in and look. One of the big differences was in the cartoon, it wasn't the Arkenstone. He was just supposed to go and get a piece of treasure.
Correct. And so that's the way it is in the book also. But I think this is an improvement. I don't know, man. They send him in. Well, what's the point? Because
the Arkenstone is like such a boring plot device. It's like, ooh, money corrupts. It's like, okay, whatever.
But it is. Let me expand on the Arkenstone a little bit. One, we've got to talk about some cutscenes. And there's a cutscene from the second movie, The Desolation of Smaug, that. It's a flashback to Thorin and Gandalf meeting for the first time. And they talk about the Arkenstone being the symbol of the king under the mountain, and how possessing the Arkenstone is key to uniting the different dwarvish clans.
Okay.
So the Arkenstone is given more importance there, first of all. And then the second thing is, in the book, Bilbo just goes down and burgles a goblet.
Yeah.
There's there's no point in just stealing a goblet other than that I made it in and out one time. But actually burgling the Arkenstone, it makes it so there's more of a point to them sending him in there.
I could sort of get behind that, but ultimately I just felt like the Arkenstone kind of took over the end of the movie.
It does, because it draws a parallel between the Arkenstone and the ring that's not textual. It's not from the book.
Yeah,
it's completely a creation of the movie.
It's too much. It doesn't. I would have rather have just been the. I mean, obviously, the war of 5 armies was fought over. Originally, the elves and the men came to siege the castle because the dwarves were hoarding wealth that had been stolen from them, and they wanted their money back that the dragon had stolen.
The elves want a particular set of gems, and the men, essentially just want the money to rebuild Dale.
And they're entitled to it.
But Thorn, he's
a greedy prick,
and he gets the dragon sickness.
Yeah, he gets the dragon sickness where he's just super greedy and he's obsessed with what he has and the whole deal. And I really just I don't know if I like the whole the whole Arkenstone plot. It doesn't bother me heavily, but I like the cartoon better.
I do. I like the Arkenstone. I don't like some other choices that we're going to get to.
Okay, well, I basically
they send Bilbo in to get the Arkenstone,
and the thing is about when he enters Erebor, it's visually stunning, just like going into Rivendell.
Yeah,
it's fucking beautiful. Like, I love the look of that dwarven stronghold.
It's much more expanded on in this time in a good way than it is in the text.
Yeah,
it's because essentially the tunnel goes straight out into the Great Hall of Erebor, and it's just filled with gold. And Tolkien doesn't really.
It's just a dragon in some gold.
He doesn't linger on the architecture at all.
Yeah.
But they've really built this really beautiful dwarven city, and I love Smaug not laying on top of the gold, but nestled in the gold. Like, he's just like...
There's so much treasure there. It's insane how much treasure there is.
Yeah, because it's not just...
It's millions of gold.
It's not just the dwarves' gold. He has the gems from the elves. He has all the wealth of Lake Town. And then he has, assumably, he's plundered other cities and stuff.
Sure.
It's all of the gold that a fire drake from the north would acquire in a lifetime.
Yeah, it's just an insane amount of gold. And I really enjoyed this Smaug scene in general. Mm-hmm. Smaug and Bilbo interacting has always been one of my favorite scenes. Mm-hmm. And I feel like this really did it justice from the book and the cartoon and then this movie.
I do love the animated Smaug with his cat face, though.
Yeah, for sure. 100%.
This Smaug is much more serpentine and behaves snakily.
Yeah, he's very dragony,
and he has the nictating membranes that go over his eye like an alligator does, and he's just much more reptilian. The animated one was had some cat features that I really like, but Benedict Cumberbatch just like kills it as Smaug.
Oh yeah, and the dialogue between the two characters was just amazing. I really enjoyed listening to the two actors go back and forth.
Yeah, well, it's two guys with just a ton of chemistry with each other already, yeah. And they're largely using the dialogue straight from the book. There's some variation, but not a lot.
And it's just so good, like the flattery routine that Bilbo does, and then the negotiation, and I just feel like they did an amazing job. And I love it when Smaug is like talking about himself, how he's talking about like, my teeth are swords, my claws are spears, my wings a hurricane.
Yeah.
It's just like, oh yeah, go ahead, brag, you deserve it.
Dragons are full of themselves.
Oh yeah.
And Bilbo, quick-witted hobbit that he is, Bilbo knows there's no fighting the dragon, but maybe I can flatter the dragon into submission.
Yeah, and this kind of, I don't even remember honestly how it kind of kicks off this sort of escape scene. Bilbo's running away from Smaug.
So Bilbo's making moves towards the Arkenstone.
Yeah,
and Smaug sort of gets it and doesn't really care because he doesn't think Bilbo can get anywhere, and he really would love to kill the last few dwarves.
Oh yeah, because Bilbo stinks of dwarves, and Smaug wants to take out the rest of Durin's folk.
Yeah, and he starts planting seeds in Bilbo's head, right, about how the dwarves are just using you. They think you're a sacrificable asset when they're sending you in here.
It's actually true.
It is sort of true. He's disposable. There's a reason why there's that funeral expense clause in his burglar contract.
Yeah, and I mean, the scrambling escape was fun, but I'm glad it seemed a little shortened. It was just too much.
So it gets into, in the book, Bilbo hustles on out of there and retreats to the dwarves. Peter Jackson always likes to kind of play up the dwarves' role from how it was in the book, and so the dwarves actually come in, and they're all hustling around Erebor, avoiding the dragon.
And it's almost like the goblin escape scene.
It's another one of those.
But it's way too in depth in this movie. Like when they're using the machinery of the city and the forges and all this stuff, it's just so extra.
Yeah. So in the full cut of the movie, they devise a plan where they'll get Smaug to restart the forges, and they're going to cover him in molten gold.
Yeah, and that's going to kill him.
It's a really beautiful bad plan.
Yeah, it's dumb. And the thing is they cut that whole molten gold scene, and then when after Smaug is pissed off and he decides, okay, I'm gonna go to Lake Town and I'm just gonna wreck it, and he bursts out of the mountain, he's covered in gold,
and
but there's no
sense.
explanation for it, and it's just ridiculous. Why didn't Tolkien editor just cut to the part where he's flying through the air after he's shed all the gold?
You don't think the scene of him bursting out of the gates of Erebor is
normally
essential?
I would say that's important, except for that he's covered in gold.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those ones I butt up against it too. It's sort of like when Gandalf shows back up in the Goblin City or Goblin Town, and there's no explanation for why he was gone. When Smaug bursts out and he's covered in gold and there's no explanation, it's like it gives you a little dissonance feeling, but I don't know how you cut it. I think him leaving is pretty important.
Yeah, maybe so. I mean, the next scene is really cool with Smaug raising Lake Town, just totally taking it out.
Where Daenerys got her steeds from, that's where.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I always really I like how Smaug is such a gnarly villain. He's just mocking Bard, and he's just talking massive shit about him, and I love it.
It is having a verbal dragon, so that it's not like he's not like a kaiju that just lumbers through the city. He also
destroys things.
He narrates what he's doing, and it just makes it all the worse.
Yeah, because he's just so brutal. He's just talking just massive smack, and I love it. It's fun, and I mean, and of course that leads to the point where Bard uses his son, who brings him the black arrow, and he ends up looking, and he sees the chink in the armor, under the belly, and he uses the black arrow, and he fells the beast.
Yeah, they made it so the Bard, was aware of the spot, and it wasn't whispered in his ear by the thrush. They just cut that thing, and that's probably a good cut.
It's probably fine.
The stuff with the kid acting as the fulcrum of the arrow or whatever.
Just get that kid out of there.
Yeah, none of that stuff was needed, but it's uncuttable because of how it was filmed.
Oh yeah, it's filmed to the point where it was just impossible to take out. So here's a timestamp, basically when Smaug dies, 3 hours and 10 minutes in, and I really feel like this is a spot you could have ended the movie. I mean,
just avoid the Battle of the Five Armies.
That's just a whole other movie. The Battle of the Five Armies is a whole other movie. There's like another hour and a half left to go.
Yeah, it's true. And the cartoon sort of acts like that. It really brushes over the Battle of the Five Armies.
Because this is too much to cover.
I do love Smaug's death scene. It's just the way the fire goes out inside of him. I think it's really effective. And he lands right on the city, and
kills the master.
Yeah, well,
he lands right on the master's boat, who's leaving with all the gold.
Yeah, I don't think he dies. I think it just sinks the treasure.
I think it gets the master, because the master is never seen again in the story.
He is in the book.
Okay, because in this movie he's never seen again, and then the next thing you see is they're on the shore, and Alfred is trying to grab a blanket from a lady, and the lady's like, "No, I'll never give you anything," and he's like, well, in the absence of the master, his lieutenant is in charge, and that's me.
Yeah.
And and then Bard busts in, and it's like, hey, no way, dude. And then Alfred turns the corner, and he's like, oh yes, of course, I've always been a supporter.
I've always supported Bard, King of Dale.
Yeah. He's such a dick. Like, who would keep a guy like that around? Like, and the thing is Bard keeps him around, and he uses him as an administrator. Had I been Bard, and I was the bargeman, and I'd been abused by this little prick all this time, the moment the master was gone, and the moment that everybody had turned the corner, that dude had been cast out. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't kill him because that's a little bit extra. I would have certainly said, you are not welcome with us anymore. Here's a bow or a knife or whatever. You go survive in the woods.
The nearest human settlement is this way.
Yeah, leave. I would have definitely got rid of that dude because he was a prick.
Yeah. I think you're right. So I think killing the master, because ultimately the master does die in the book, it's tidier to do it there.
It was cheesy to have the dragon land on him.
Yeah, but it stops him from escaping with the gold. And the fact that there is gold unrecovered at the bottom of the lake is a key point in the book.
Sure. And I mean, I think that it cuts to the dwarves, and it's basically they're making much ado about Thorin being obsessed with the Arkenstone.
Yeah.
And they just spend a lot of time with Thorin being just mad.
And it turns out Bilbo has the Arkenstone.
Yeah, it's in his pocket, that same tricksy little pocket.
Yeah.
Gollum was right about him.
He actually wanted to give it to Thorin, but he can see that Thorin is kind of going down the Gollum road, and he is suspicious about it. And so he hatches a plan. Well, no, we're getting a little ahead of ourselves because the elves show up? Is that the next?
Yeah, so the elves show up, and basically they give food to the men of Dale, and they're really nice.
Sword.
And then they're dicks.
Really nice is a little strong.
So like they show up with aid, and then they're dicks to the people. And then
so Thranduil is the king of the wood elves. Mm-hmm. Shows up riding on a stag.
Pretty dope stag.
Very extra though. That's a horse would have done okay.
I like the stag.
He likes to make a show of things.
Yeah. Next level.
And he's shown up late to the party. I heard your dragon died.
I'm here for my goods.
I'm here for my gems that are up in the cave.
And I mean, basically, Thorin is like, hell no. The men of Dale and the elves of Mirkwood make an alliance. They're gonna go. The elves are talking. They're gonna just march to war. That's the first go to.
Yeah.
But Bard is
they don't know that the dwarves are alive.
Yeah, they're just gonna go get them. Mm-hmm. And then they go and they see the braziers are lit.
Yeah.
This is the seventh kingdom of Dane's folk.
Durin's folk.
Yeah, my bad.
Thorin has been piling up rocks in the gate. He's been plugging up that
so
dragon
pointless.
hole and is ready.
Because we've seen Legolas just run up walls. Like, those elves care nothing.
It's really too. There's absolutely no way that it's 10 dwarves and a hobbit are supposed to hold this whole city from
maybe 12 dwarves and a hobbit, right?
No, because 3 of them stayed in.
Oh, you're right.
Stayed in Lake Town.
No, but Feely and Keely had made it back. At that point, it's a bad cut.
Yeah, right.
But all the dwarves are there.
All 13 dwarves plus 1 hobbit.
Well, no, 12 dwarves because Gandalf is one of the 14.
Yep. Okay. We're settled on our math.
I just actually, But normally that's you that does that.
The point is, it's an insufficient force to even hold this heavily fortified city.
Yeah, there's no way that they're going to keep it from those elves.
But they send a raven to Dane in the Iron Hills.
I know, George Martin, you thief.
They want dwarven reinforcements. And Dane wouldn't come to help them take the place, but he will come to help them hold it.
Yeah, which is, I mean, I liked Dane when he showed up. He's pretty cool. But basically, the elves and the humans want their money. The dwarves are like, no. And they're like, okay, we're going to take it. But then at the last minute, the dwarves show up, a dwarven army. And then freaking Thorin, the worst, he will not leave the hold to help Dane fight these bad guys.
Yeah. So we skipped over something, though.
But the orcs arrive, right?
Well, no, first, Bilbo.
Oh, yeah, Bilbo leaves.
Bilbo sneaks out, thief in the night, and he goes to the encampment and delivers the Arkenstone to the elves and the humans.
Yeah, he basically gives it to Bard and Thranduil.
So that they can so they have a chip to bargain with Thorin over.
And Bilbo claims that that's his 14th of the share.
Yeah.
And so he's entitled to it. I mean, that's a huge stretch. That's clearly Thorin's.
Well, and Thorin told him he could take his pick of the stuff. Mm-hmm. So he didn't he said he wanted the Arkenstone, and anyone that didn't give it to him would be a traitor. But he also said you can take whatever you choose, and Bilbo was very generous with himself.
And so this is all just setting up the Battle of Five Armies.
Yeah.
You have dwarves, you have elves, you have men. The orcs show up in the form of the White Orc with all of his dudes because they want to take Erebor and hold it so that they have the gateway to the north.
Right.
And so they show up. That's 4 armies, and then at the very end, this mystery army that has made no appearance in the entire movie shows up for literally no reason,
just to save the day.
The giant eagles. Mm-hmm. Of course, they are a thing in the book. They're just not in this cut.
Okay, so since you're broad brushing all of this stuff, and that's
appropriate,
and that's probably fine. How do you feel, because Tolkien famously said that he hates allegory and that nothing represents anything, that the story is just the story.
Okay.
But because of Tolkien's experience in World War I and America's late arrival in World War I have a really hard time not thinking of the eagles as
the eagle is the
symbol
emblem
of America and kind of turning the tide in the war.
Sure, that's
intentional, right?
Like pretty clear. And the orcs are the Germans.
Well, I mean, if you look at World War I propaganda art of quote the Hun,
yeah,
it's an orc. Like World War I really informs these stories much more than Tolkien was willing to admit.
Oh, it was. I mean, yeah, he says that it doesn't, but it does. And I mean, there's a lot of really fun little scenes in these war scenes that go on entirely too long.
But Billy Connolly as Dane, the dwarf lord and Thorin's cousin, riding on his big pig and swinging his warhammer around, that's all great.
And I love the rams that the dwarves mount to go and attack the White Orc. I like Gandalf calls it out. Oh, he's taking his best warriors.
Yeah, he's gonna cut the head off the serpent.
Yes, and that's good, and it was cool. And the thing is for I liked the battle scenes in general. I liked the bravery of the dwarves. Yeah. They were outnumbered, but they formed their shield wall and they didn't give a fuck. They're just like, we're here and we'll fight to the end.
So that is one of those great epic moments, right? The dwarves, they form their phalanx, and it's like a cool, because they're short. And they have these big iron shields. They do like this sort of double phalanx where it's not just a shield wall.
Layers.
It's like a shield wall with a roof.
Yeah.
And then 2 rows of spears come out of it.
And then the orcs are charging.
And then the elves finally decide to pick a side in this fight.
And they leap over the dwarves into the fray. And that actually gave me some goosebumps. I was like, oh, it's so awesome.
It is really good when the armies of men and the armies of men are just conscripted farmers.
Yeah, they're not really soldiers. They suck. They got one warrior. His name is Bard.
Yeah, so the farmers of men and the armies of dwarves and elves get it together to fight this horde of it's orcs, goblin, urukai, trolls, giant bats.
It's pretty grim.
There's a lot. They're very outmatched until the eagles show up.
Yeah, and I mean, and it kind of is cutting back and forth between that war scene and Thorin and his people fighting the white orc and his people.
So I never did call out that. So Azog is played by Manu Bennett.
Okay.
Motion acted, same way that Andy Serkis does Gollum.
Sure.
And I really enjoy him as an actor. He played Deathstroke in the show Arrow.
Okay.
And he's a good actor. He brings a lot to that a character that's just one line in the book.
Yeah, and I mean the fight between him and Thorin was really good. All the way up until he just does the dumbest damn thing and smashes the ice beneath his own feet. It's like, come on, dude.
Yeah, or he's swinging the mace around.
Yeah. The chain, the ball and chain thing, and he just smashes the ice underneath his feet. And then they let us think that he's dead and he's under there, but then of course not. He stabs his prosthetic arm spear thing up into Thorin's foot and
through an iron boot. I mean, how do you stab through an iron boot? That just seems impossible.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, are the bottoms iron though?
I mean, wouldn't that be the part that you made iron?
Or maybe the toe, but
definitely the toe cap is. Fighting on an ice sheet in iron boots is a bad move from the start.
Thorin was ripe to fall in.
Very reckless.
But then, of course, Thorin kills him. But here's my question.
Okay.
Thorin got captured by the elves, and they got all their stuff taken, and it's very obvious they get fleeced hard. Fili and Kili have a ton of hidden daggers. They're clearly rogues if they were D&D characters.
Yeah.
When did Thorin get Orcrist back?
It's cut from the movie. Because
he did not have it leaving in a barrel.
No, and he did not have it when they charge the orcs. I think we're missing a scene where him and the king of the wood elves come to terms with each other.
And he just hands it over.
And he gives him Orcrist back. Because I always forget that guy's name because... Elvish is too lyrical for me. I have a hard time with it. But Lee Pace is the actor.
It's Thranduil, right?
Yeah, Thranduil. So Thranduil and Thorin have a moment, and
it
Thranduil
just gets cut.
It gets cut because we cut all the stuff
now
with the love triangle.
Second question regarding Orcrist. If you are a king of the dwarves and you have access to the full armories of Erebor, why don't you just use some dope-ass dwarf weapon? Why are you using an elfy pokey bit?
It's a pretty cool sword, though.
It's cool. It's the goblin cleaver, but I mean, I would have gone with something straight out of Erebor's armory.
Fair enough. He did... But
maybe I'm just thinking too hard about their gear.
No, and I think that makes more sense without the scene because the elves and the dwarves have to come to an understanding with each other in this moment, and because so much of that is cut out, we don't get it on the screen. And so why he switched swords is just sort of left to your imagination. Because there's a really bad scene that I hate that is cut with Legolas fighting a troll that has all of his hands and feet have all been removed and replaced with spiked maces. And it's logistically absurd. And then Legolas stabs a sword into the back of his head and then is like steering it like a joystick and controlling the troll. And it's a scene I really despise that they cut out. There's a lot of stuff like that has just been chopped, and this scene has been cleaned up a lot.
There's too much war shenanigans because they made it into 3 movies. Like, if they had kept it as 2, they would have had so much less nonsense.
A tight 2 movies that are like 2.5 hours long.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay, so going back to Thorin and Orcrist and all of that. When Thorin dies, he gets stabbed. He's having the blade pushed down, and he's blocking it, and he lets himself get stabbed so that he can kill the White Orc.
Yeah.
And, that's a lot more heroic than how he died in the cartoon, which is just like in a medic tent that he got, whatever.
Right. Well, the same thing happened, but it happens off panel because in the book, Bilbo gets donked in the head, and then we miss the whole battle past when the eagle shows up.
From his perspective.
Right. So Bilbo gets donked and is out, and then we come back to later. This version of it puts Bilbo much more in the action so he can witness this stuff happening.
And what I was going to say about that is, even though I knew that Thorin was going to die, when Thorin actually dies and he's there, and then the dwarves show up, it's pretty hard hitting. Like,
it is. I teared up a little bit.
It was really, really good. Like, we knew it was coming, and it was very clear that he sacrificed himself, but it was just nice that at the end he was himself. The dragon sickness had gone, the Arkenstone nonsense had gone, and he was back to being Thorin.
And he patches it up with Bilbo. He says, I want to part with you as friends.
Yes. And that's pretty important because everyone loves Bilbo.
Yeah.
If you don't, you're horrible.
You're literally a bad person if you don't like Bilbo Baggins.
Yeah, that's pretty true. I mean, both Bilbo, Frodo, and Samwise, like all 3 of those guys, like you kind of have to like them. Okay,
I'm pretty down on Frodo.
Bilbo and Samwise.
Yeah. Frodo's like a Trustafarian. Bilbo.
True.
Bilbo has given him this lap of luxury, and I don't care for how he treats Sam.
That's true.
Not at all. But we skipped over the thing. I wanted to bring this up. This whole battle should have been at night.
Oh yeah.
Because none of these trolls should be in operation, and orcs and goblins.
They hate the day.
They hate the daylight. But the whole thing happens in the broad of day, and it doesn't make any sense.
Well, that way you can see it better.
Yeah. Oh, but it doesn't make sense. The trolls would turn to stone. Like the whole...
I agree. And they had established that previously, and then they break the rule.
They break their own rule. Be true to your own rules. Like, you have to. If you make rules, you have to stick to your own rules.
I agree.
Trolls can't be in the daylight.
I totally agree. And so just sort of the movie's almost over. Bilbo's departure from the dwarves, he was trying to just slip away, and then they caught him. Balin caught him because Balin was always his buddy.
Yeah.
And then all the other guys were there, and it was really emotional. Like, those guys, they were battle brothers. Like, it was cool. Like, I really liked that part.
And he says, tea time's at 4, don't bother knocking.
Yeah.
And that's really like, my house is your house, and you can show up whenever, and you're just welcome.
Yeah, and basically, I think the acting was just really good, like on all parts. And then Bilbo's walking away, and he's walking back to the Shire, and he's with Gandalf, and I love that he has that dope dwarven shield on his back. He never used it.
He never used it. He's got like a cloak with the big brooch on it. Oh, yeah. Like, he's came
dwarfed out.
He came away with a lot of loot. And I mean, and that's textual. That's in the book. He came away with a good chunk of treasure from that. And then he also picked up the troll horde on the way back.
On the way back. And here's the thing. As he walks into the Shire and Gandalf says he has to leave, movie should have ended.
Oh, you think?
The auction scene was just...
But that's in the book.
I don't care. It was tired. I was ready for it to be over. I had a bunch of good feelings from the departure from the dwarves, and I liked seeing him all bedecked in all his goods, and how he was returning a hero. And then they show up, and he's just dealing with a bunch of shit heel scavengers.
Yeah, he's got cousins, the Sackville Bagginses.
They're the worst.
They have designs on his stuff. But again, that's where, if your rule is I believe in this stuff that came from the book and I cut out the stuff that didn't, the stuff that you leave in that wasn't in the book is really glaring, and the stuff that you cut that was in the book is really glaring.
They cut Sharky, though. They cut the whole deal with Saruman being, was that in the Lord of the Rings at the very end of that?
So what is in the...
Because Saruman never appears in this whole book.
No. What happens in the book is Gandalf explains that he met with the White Wizard,
yes,
and they fought the Necromancer, and, that's how he knows that the Goblin army is coming.
Okay.
All of that stuff in the full cut of the movie, all of that stuff is there. In this version, it's not.
So I guess that's kind of the end of the movie, the auction scene, and then he goes into his house and he kind of sees things. And even though the house is mostly emptied and it's all dirty, he still feels good about being there. He hangs back up the picture of his mother.
And he gets the stuff mostly back. Some of it he has to buy back, but...
Yeah, he's rich as hell.
He's got a lot of treasure he's come back from this adventure with.
And that's kind of the end of it. And then it cuts to old Bilbo and
Ian Holm, R.I.P. He passed away this year, right?
Was it this year? Yeah, it was very recently.
Man, we've lost a lot of legends this year.
Pretty sad. But I mean, the movie ends, and it was 4.5 hours long. Man, it felt like a long movie. I like the story, though. There was so much good stuff. So what worked for you? What were your highlights?
The first half of the movie worked beautifully to me. Like everything up until the break where we cut awkwardly to them going to Beor's cabin.
Okay.
Just works so good. Like, it is so well cut together.
So the first Hobbit movie was actually good. With some cuts.
The first Hobbit movie with some cuts was perfect.
Yeah.
The second two movies edited together, it gets a little rougher for me.
Yeah, it was a little bit too much. Okay. So what really worked for me is, of course, I just love this story. I love this whole paradigm. For me, The Hobbit forms the basis of my fantasy paradigm, and I'm a big nerd. So, but personal highlights is the acting of the dwarves, Gollum, and Bilbo.
Oh yeah.
The acting from those characters in particular, like I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really fun. So, what didn't work for you?
You can't cut that eagle scene. I think like that is essential to it. I think Tolkien editor, not to tell you your job as fan editor,
but we are also fans.
Yeah, you should have kept the natural break between the two movies instead of trying to make it seamless, and so you could keep that scene, the integrity of that scene in there.
Okay.
And that just doesn't work for me. And then, of course, the platform gaming stuff we've already talked about, but I hate it so much.
Yeah. So that was actually my number one thing of what didn't work for me was the platforming, the series of constantly falling. I just couldn't stand it. But really, I felt like this was overly long. I feel like they could have condensed this into a 3-hour movie. You would have lost some of the grandeur of some of the locations, and you would have lost a lot of the Battle of Five Armies. But I kind of feel like in the book, that's mostly skipped because Bilbo gets knocked out. And I think that's intentional because a war isn't actually fun. It's not an adventure.
Yeah, Yoda, right? Wars don't make one great.
Yeah.
Like, it's nothing to be relished in.
So they could have really made that kind of a high level meta thing where you meet the primary players, you meet Dane, you meet the elves, the men, and the orcs and whatnot. But they should have just made that more like a scenery, a backdrop thing.
Yeah.
Like when, okay, I'm not going to suggest a bunch of edits, but basically I think this could have been a really strong 3-hour movie or 2 2-hour movies.
Yes.
This could have been a really good main movie and then sequel, basically where the first movie brings them to Lake Town, and then the second movie takes them from
No, the first movie gets them delivered from the goblins, and then the second movie is from Beor all the way through the army.
You think already?
Yeah, because that's where the natural break happens.
Okay.
Because the eagles deposit them on a bear-shaped mountain and leave them in Beor's territory, and that's the end of the first movie. And then the second movie starts with Bilbo seeing Beorn for the first time. And I think that's the natural break, and it needed to stay in there.
So let's go ahead and do some final thoughts. And even though this is a fan edit or whatever, let's go ahead and give it a rating because that's what we do. What do you have any final thoughts, and what's your rating?
My final thoughts are, I feel a little bad criticizing this because it took a lot of technical skill for an amateur to go in and make this as tight as it was. And so it's real easy from me in my armchair to say, you should have cut it here instead of there. I think Tolkien editor, whoever you may be, did an exceptional job.
Okay. And what's your rating on this?
3.5.
Okay, so that's a recommend, but not a glowing recommend.
Yeah, I mean it's a strong positive. Honestly, it led me to have a greater appreciation for the films, I think.
Okay. So I guess my final thoughts were similar, is that this fan edit is better than the retail version of the movies. And I definitely think that this is fun. I had a lot of really good feelings throughout it. Like there were some touching moments, there were some thrilling moments. I feel like the acting was superb. There were really no trash characters in here like some movies. And so I would give I would have given the original, just the trilogy, I would have probably given the trilogy like 3.25 stars.
Yeah.
But I can definitely see bumping this fan edit to 3.5. I was thinking 3.75, but I'm not sure it's that great.
No, it's got
I think Lord of the Rings a little bit better than this, and Lord of the Rings still not perfect. So I'm gonna go with 3.5. I'm gonna agree with you, and I think that's. We pretty well deep dived this, and we did it in about half the time of the movie.
That's a great improvement for us.
That's a good one. So let's go ahead and take a break, and then we'll get back together with the closer.
Welcome back, divers. We are coming to our final segment, the one where I ask Dave, what are you into right now?
Well, normally I like to have something fresh and new to talk about for these segments, but ultimately with my moving and unpacking and, of course, working, taking up so much time, I don't have a lot of new stuff to do, but with all of my moving and packing and unpacking, it's sort of rekindled some of my interests in older hobbies that I've kind of circled back around on. And so I'm going to talk briefly about two things that I've actually talked a bit about on this show before.
Okay.
First one is Warhammer 40K.
Oh, jeez. You talk about this a lot on the podcast.
I talk about this a lot. Well, I said I'm building a Eldar army, which is space elves, basically. Well, my other army, my original army is a Space Marines army. It's sort of a Norse-themed custom chapter.
Oh, how out of character for you.
I know. Well, I've decided it is a custom chapter though, and I've decided that I'm gonna cross the Rubicon Primaris, as they call it in the fluff, and I am going to make a new Space Marines chapter based on the new models and the new material, because it's been years since I did it, and they've released an entirely new line, and they're all bigger, they're more true scale, like proper human proportions.
Oh, okay.
Like what would an 8-foot tall super soldier look like, not like these kind of hunched over weird guys in armor like the original Marines, and they're called the Primaris Marines. And so I decided I'm gonna do a Primaris Space Wolves army, proper Viking Space Marines, the ones straight out of the book. I'm going to do it right, but I'm going to do the old school paint job. I'm not going to do the new school, which is kind of they call it an icy blue. I call it a robin egg blue. Don't love it. I'm going to do their original scheme, which is gray, like gray wolves.
But that's the chapter you played before, though, isn't it?
I played a custom successor chapter, which was basically they were crimson red with black accents, and that's
okay.
my Marines are all crimson red with all wolfy bits and shoulder pads and everything. It's a custom successor, which is normal to play in. You're supposed to invent your own. That's kind of the standard thing. Well, I guess it's not the standard, but it's highly encouraged. Anyway, so I'm going to do that. And I'm not going to dwell too much on Warhammer 40K, but the Space Wolves have been calling my name, and I want to do it proper. And I'm tired of people walking up to my army and saying, "What is that?" I want them to look at it, and I want them to say, "Wow, those are some awesome Space Wolves." So
interesting.
That's what I'm going to do with that. And I've been planning it with my buddy Ed, and I've been picking up a couple bits here and there. But, I haven't busted them all out. They're still in boxes, my paints and everything. But I will be painting soon.
Do you have that? It's a relatively new set, like within the last half a year or so, where it's some Space Wolves and some Orcs, like it's two kind of squads, I don't know, with a boss from each team.
I don't think that's very new. Okay. But unless it's one of the lesser sub games, like the niche like Warcry or whatever. But in 40K, I don't have that one. I do have the Space Marine half of the Indomitus box set that just came out. It's got like bikers and heavy guys and some cool dudes with big shields. And I'm going to switch their shields out to have Viking shields rather than these big Crusader shields,
Interesting.
I'll make them look dope.
Very custom.
Yeah. Every model will be individually converted. There will be no standard models in this army. Because It's not like I don't have another army to play with or two other armies to play with. Okay, so the other thing that I've been busting into lately is I'm getting super hyped for Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, the new D&D supplement, which I talked about before, and I'm getting super hyped for Baldur's Gate 3. They released, it's a new video game, D&D video game, but they released the pre-play version of it where you can play about the first fourth of the game. I did not play that because I want to play all of it all the way through. I don't want to play a teaser or a demo.
If you play that, does your progress save over to when you actually start the game? Or?
I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't like that either.
And even if it did, I don't care because I want to play it all through seamlessly. So I've been deep diving some D&D again, and I've been I want to shout out two YouTubers that are kind of my go-to sources for these two things. That way our divers have something to take away from this. If you are a Warhammer 40K person or you're interested in Warhammer 40K, there's a guy called Auspex Tactics. Auspex is a piece of gear in the game. So Auspex Tactics is a rule-focused 40K channel where he talks about new releases and new units and new codexes, and he talks about them in depth. He's a deep nerd. This British guy. And then the other one for D&D is called Nerd Immersion. And Nerd Immersion is a nerdy guy. He's an American, and he talks about D&D, every new release, every new FAQ or errata that comes out. He's all on it, and he's a good source for interesting insights and things like that. So those two guys have become my news and analysis sources. Okay. And so I want to shout them out, Auspex Tactics and Nerd Immersion, for anyone who's interested in those two games.
It's interesting that Tasha's Book of Everything,
it's a cauldron
of everything, has a lot of buzz around it. Like I keep
huge,
seeing stuff about it on social media, like from people kind of outside our circle, like people are aware of that book.
It's a pretty big thing because it does some fundamental changes to the system, allowing you pretty much total customization of your race, and at least a lot of interesting customizations for your character. Like if you're playing a monk and Stunning Fist doesn't make sense, there's alternate abilities for that level of monk. So you can pick different abilities that make more sense for your dude. There's also different options for subclasses, different new archetypes. But that's pretty normal. They put out a lot of new archetypes, but they've never done something like this with the class abilities and the races.
Yeah, I look forward to looking through your book. I don't know if I'll actually purchase it, but
oh man,
I did finally get a player's handbook, so maybe I will.
Oh man, you're the worst. So
I'm a leech, a book leech.
So that's what I've been into. What are you into right now?
Well, it's weird because we took this long gap between recordings, and we passed over a couple things that I was into, like Raised by Wolves on HBO Max. I was gonna talk about that at one point, and then listen to an audiobook I was gonna cover at one point, but those things both started to feel stale.
All right.
So the thing right now that I'm into, maybe ironically, probably older than the other things, is Marco Polo on Netflix.
Oh man, that is really old.
Yeah, from 2014. I didn't watch it. But we went to an exhibit on Genghis Khan and the Mongols at the local Museum of Science and Industry, OMSI, and it got me thinking about Mongols, which has always been something I was interested in. And of course, I played Ghost of Tsushima, which I've mentioned a couple times on the podcast, and the Mongols are the big baddies of that game.
So does that take place during like the Song Dynasty, which is the dynasty immediately preceding the Mongol invasion and takeover, or do they not get specific?
Ghost of Tsushima?
Yeah.
I guess it would be shortly after that. It would be after the Mongols have taken taken the walled city. So after the events of Marco Polo.
Okay, gotcha. So it's actually during Kublai Khan's reign?
Or his kids, like the.
Well, after Kublai Khan died, it was pretty much over. But it doesn't actually matter.
I would have to Google that to be precise about it.
I'm just a history nerd.
And I am too, but much more of a casual. You're an academic, a literal academic in this case. Anyways. It made me want to finally check out Marco Polo, which I had been sort of avoiding because I don't like what I perceive anyway as like white savior stories, right?
Okay.
Where it's like this story where miraculously Doctor Strange goes off to Timbuktu or whatever and becomes the greatest sorcerer ever, or Bruce Wayne goes, and becomes the greatest
Iron Fist.
Yeah, or Iron Fist, whatever the thing is. And I kind of thought Marco Polo was going to be one of those things where
but he's not.
It's not. No, because he actually is.
He sucks.
Like he's mediocre at all the things that he does. He very much is the Latin pet of the Great Khan.
Oh yeah.
And I really like Benedict Wong as Kublai Khan is so good.
He is. He's. It's impossible for me to read about history and not think of that portrayal.
And it's, he's got kind of, because he has that chubby face, he really looks like the illustrations that you see of Kublai Khan.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, the show really is Kublai Khan. It's not the Marco Polo show.
No, it's through the lens of Marco Polo because he was there for 17 years. And then he did make his way back to Europe before his eventual death. And so definitely I like that Marco Polo is about it's through his eyes as the outsider, kind of how Bilbo is the outsider and you're learning about the dwarves.
Definitely. So it's
clearly I've seen the show.
Yeah, John Fusco is the creator and the writer of the show. And Lorenzo Richelme, I think is his name, plays Marco Polo. But like I said, Benedict Wong, who we know him as Wong in the Doctor Strange movies, is really the star of these 2 seasons of the show.
And did you watch the side thing?
I haven't yet. I'm actually only just a little bit into season 2. I finished season 1 and watched 1 episode of season 2, and then I broke out to deep dive The Hobbit.
I mean, watch it all, including the side stuff. It's awesome.
With 100 Eyes, played by Tom Wu.
Yeah, 100 Eyes is one of my favorite characters in the whole thing.
Oh, he's so badass. I obviously I love the warrior monk trope.
Yeah,
and so he's the warrior monk and the blind warrior trope. He's double dipping.
Yeah, it's a really good show. That's worthy. If you have not watched Marco Polo on Netflix, I think it's Netflix, right?
Yeah, it's on Netflix. You have Netflix. Everyone has Netflix.
Definitely watch Marco Polo. It's really good. Like it's one of those historical fiction things that ends up, of course there's dramatization, but there's also a lot of really good history in there. Yeah,
and I like who's the Biamba, the bastard son of the Khan.
Oh yeah, that guy's awesome.
Oh, he's really cool. And there's just, I mean, I could just list all the characters. Joan Chen is Empress Chabi. Chico Leo on the Fan Bros podcast always called this the non-white Game of Thrones. And it really is. Like, really like a sort of East Asia and Middle Eastern Game of Thrones.
Don't you think they should make a series set in Essos? Like a free cities kind of social political, I don't know, that'd be fun.
That would be fun, but I think we're just gonna get more Targaryens. They just
like the Targaryens.
Yeah, well, I'm with you. There's a lot of the Game of Thrones world that we haven't explored, and we probably never will, unfortunately.
Oh yeah. At a certain point, Martin will age out, and that's a nice way of saying die.
But anyways, that's what I've been into right now. So I think we're coming to the end of the show. Do you want to give them the call to action?
Yeah, go ahead and subscribe to us on your favorite podcaster catcher. I say that wrong half the time, right? Subscribe to us wherever you listen to us. And especially if you are, if you're new, we have all of our episodes up on YouTube. They're available on Spotify, and they're available on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, pretty much everywhere. So find us, rate us, give us a 5-star review. Costs you nothing, but means everything to us.
And you can find us on all social media platforms across the metaverse as Deep Dive the Meta. Again, I want to push that Pinterest, because even though nobody likes it, I put a lot of time into curating those boards, and we've only got 2 followers, and I'm one of them.
Yeah, they're pretty good, actually.
Thank you. He's from follower number 2.
Nick and Dave, Deep Dive Pinterest.
Yeah.
Well, I guess this is really goodbye.
Don't say goodbye. Say good journey.